of the empire continues.
More attacks are taking place in the Strait of Hormuz. According to a recent report, uncertainty leaves waterway in dire straits of dark transits, attacks and rising costs. Vessel attacks and environmental fallout remain a feature in Middle Eastern airways. And there were reports that 2 vessels were attacked. UK-based Vanguard Tech reported Iranian claims that IRGC forces had struck 2 unspecified targets in the Strait of Hormuz on the 6th of August. We did not have confirmation from the IRGC. It could be a situation where they didn't declare it, or they're waiting to declare it later on, or it's just a secret move, or it's a false flag. The vessels were not identified, but Vanguard said the claim likely referred to Marshall Islands flagged VLCCs Nissos Kia and Nissos Keros, which both went dark, interrupting AIS transmissions. No independent confirmation or verification of the purpose of attacks has yet arisen, and the Royal Navy-led United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations UKMTO Centre's latest recorded incident involves vessels reporting explosions in the vicinity. So there's likelihood that this could be Iran, but there's also likelihood that it could be other groups. Now, Iran usually is the party that targets them if they were using the American route or the American designated route that the United States said is safe. But on the ground, there are certain statements coming from the American side, according to a U.S. official who told Reuters that they will lift the blockade on Iranian ports as soon as an agreement is announced to resume shipping without hindrance, and any such agreement will take place for approximately 2 to 4 months. But if we're now talking about attacks in the Strait of Hormuz, 2 of them, that would be a very strong message coming from Iran that wouldn't be necessarily surprising, because Iran has all of the cards. The United States is in a dire position. Again, recently reported that for the first time since approximately 1985, not even 1 oil barrel from Saudi Arabia reached the United States. In essence, the Red Sea is closed, not just the Strait of Hormuz, which means the stakes are very, very high. And Trump is suffering even more, and Iran has even more leverage, so Trump has to make more concessions now, both him and the Saudi regime. Because if you're talking about the 2 straits, that other one from the western part of Saudi Arabia, that was the exit, that was the secondary route, that's very problematic. Now, all of that indicates that an explosion could be imminent, despite all of these talks. Because we've been there, we've seen all of this before very many times. It would be naive to think that, okay, that's it, there's going to be a deal and it's going to be amazing. No, no, and no. We're talking about the Trump administration, the Epstein blackmailed regime, and the Zionists. And Israel has been speaking about certain things lately. One of the things that Israel spoke about is the fact that, firstly, they spent approximately $5 billion lately, just because they needed to be in peak readiness mode in certain locations. All of the deployment, all of the preparations, all of the actions on the ground, all of the mobilization, because an attack was about to happen. You know, Trump was saying an attack was about to happen. We will attack them and this will happen. Israel is waiting. Now they are in a situation where Israeli media is speaking about the army being exhausted from this situation of no peace and no war. They're constantly having to deploy and redeploy. But what the Israelis are saying is they're in peak readiness, and they have been in peak readiness for a very long time. But despite being in peak readiness, sometimes they will need to have certain deployments. Sometimes they will need to escalate further with certain moves. or more preparations, because the United States might have an imminent attack and they're not necessarily in the know of every single thing that goes around on the negotiating table. They do with the American army and the deployment, and they have a joint room and they talk together 24/7. They're in full coordination, but not necessarily with the prospects of having any sort of deal. They're used to Trump having these declarations, and we heard many criticism, much criticism coming from Israeli officials against Donald Trump, including senior figures in the government. So, no guarantees that any deal is going to happen. Iran is in a strong position, hence why things aren't completely exploding now. They have the cards. The United States is suffering more. The more time goes by, the more Trump's regime gets into more problems, be it economic, be it political, be it any other problems that he's facing. And that would leave Trump with, again, and it's still leaving him with the following decisions to make. Either one, have more concessions and declare that there's a deal. Two, no concessions, no deal, another major attack, potentially with the participation of Israel, and this time it's going to be very big. And in any such case, they will definitely be paying a much heavier price than they did both in the 12-day war and in the 40-day war.
Jansen. And once again, we're very honored to welcome into the studio Professor Robert Pape. He is one of America's best insiders into air campaigns, military strategy, and has been absolutely a phenomenal resource of information regarding this escalation in Iran and everything with the Iran war. Professor Pape, how are you today?
Terrific. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Professor, I've so enjoyed your insights that you continue to share, and everyone around the world knows you for the escalation trap. And this is something that the United States government, Donald Trump, has been deeply intertwined with over the last few months. And I want you to give you the platform here to explain a little bit more about the escalation trap. And really the most important thing right now is where we are in this trap, because I believe that it is literally spiraling out of control. So I'd like to get your thoughts as we're recording this in early August.
Thank you again for giving me an opportunity to talk to your audience. An escalation trap occurs when an attacker uses mostly air power to strike targets and is tactically successful. The bombs hit targets. In this case, bombs killed leaders, destroyed missile launchers, but the attacker becomes strategically weaker. And the reason is because air power alone rarely is going to achieve these major objectives. So the escalation trap, it doesn't only happen with air power, but sometimes I call it the smart bomb trap, because the illusion of control that comes with smart bombs, we have PowerPoint presentations, people in uniform with stars, and it is true that the bombs will hit within 95% of the time within 3 feet or less of the target. You can actually hit a chair with our precision bombs. That creates an illusion of not just tactical success, but strategic success. The problem is that's the trap. That's the trap. And we fell into the trap. Other American presidents have fallen into this trap. Other countries, Putin has fallen into the trap. But the trap we're in now with Iran, this is probably the most wicked escalation trap for America in history, and maybe just in history. It is that difficult because every month that this war has proceeded, you have seen President Trump has tried a new tactical strategy. First, it was leadership bombing. That didn't collapse the regime in Iran. Then it was shifting over to 6 weeks of a bombing campaign against mostly military targets. These are the launcher. This was the launcher campaign. And it did. We did score some success. We were not quite as tactically successful as some might have thought, but nonetheless, we did knock out a fair portion of Iran's missiles and missile launchers. And then we shifted over to, but that didn't lead to success. Iran did not buckle there either. And then we shifted over to the U.S. blockade, which again was tactically successful. We could stop ships. We could even attack ships. But it produced not just strategic failure, but strategic weakness. Now, what's the key weakness in all of these points? It is Iran taking Hormuz. In every single, what happened in this war is within the first few days, Iran lashed back, and with its drones, it also used mines, it effectively seized control of Hormuz. And this was fully predictable, Cyrus. So 3 days before the first bombs fell on the Escalation Trap Substack, I published the very first post called The Smart Bomb Trap. And this piece is the product of 20 years of modeling the bombing of Iran. I do this every year in my class called Strategy. That's the nickname for it at the University of Chicago. I end that class in the spring with a 90-minute simulation of what would happen if we bombed Iran, the nuclear sites, et cetera, et cetera. And I've been doing that for over 20 years. And so the stages I lay out, stage one, the bombs would be tactically successful. Stage two, Iran would lash back, seize Hormuz. Stage three, we would be caught in a ground power dilemma where we are going to face a choice. Either we concede and Iran becomes truly a regional hegemon. It's not just a matter of ending a war with Hormuz. Iran has an enormous capacity now to become far more powerful than it ever has been in its modern history. And this will really change the dynamics of world politics. Or we either accept that outcome or we have to fight to take it back. Iran's not just going to give it up, and they're not just going to sue for peace, because what's occurring here is a shift in the balance of power. That's what it means to become strategically weaker. And that's why Iran is just not going to give this up. So that was the prediction 3 days before the bombs fell. And then the bombs fell, and literally everything happened. And then the additional steps that President Trump took, these are also in my classes in strategy. I teach for weeks about the limits of punishment bombing campaigns, the air campaigns, the limits of them without ground forces. I've been studying this and publishing on this for 30 years. I've taught for the U.S. Air Force conventional targeting strategy. So, and also economic blockades, economic sanctions. So all of that is not just material that I'm kind of have a passing familiarity with. This has been much of my life's work for 35 years, and updated, not just publish a book, put it on a shelf, and you're done with it. But in my classes at the University of Chicago, I'm very privileged to be teaching really quite smart folks. So I can update everything on an ongoing basis. And that's why it's actually one of the more popular classes at the university. And it presents frameworks that for the students, and these are for undergrads through PhD students, that they can use not just simply to take a test and get graded on it, but they can use as they go on. If they go on to get into government service, as many do, if they go on into the military, as some do, if they go on to get PhDs or go on into academia or go into the think tank world. So and also the private sector, by the way, because increasingly there are risk components of, say, United Airlines and so forth that need to have better frameworks for how they understand. So these are the frameworks that I've been using and have been using for decades, and they have been extremely valuable. I've also advised every White House from 2001 to 2024, again, about these issues of escalation. Not, of course, always not about the escalation of Iran. That's the unique one today. But there have been many issues related to escalation over the last 20 years. And so these are the basic frameworks that I have developed. And I decided to bring them out to the world, and I had no idea that they would be, the reception would be so strong. It's really quite wonderful, and it's sometimes overwhelming, and it's just terrific. But I really think that this shows there is an enormous hunger for depth and real substance. And I'm doing my best to keep the Substack community here ahead of the risks, and so it's really quite humbling and quite an honor to be involved in this.
Well, Professor Pape, I want to say it's just an honor to be able to interview you for our YouTube channel and to share your message with the world, because I do believe you are the best expert that that can really dissect the truth about what's happening in Iran and really come at it from a pro-America standpoint. I mean, you want obviously the America to do well, but you're not afraid to say the truth and understand, look, we're making, very big mistakes here. There's a pattern here. There's systems here. And again, you did mention your Substack. Everybody, we are going to put links to Professor Pape's Substack down below. It is a fantastic follow. If you really are interested in this, which I know you are because you're watching this YouTube video, I want you to make sure that you're subscribing to Professor Pape's Substack. We'll put those links down below. But Professor, you've argued for a long time that this war is not really about Iran. Maybe it's a little bit more about whether the United States can still shape events in the Middle East. And my question is, have we already crossed that line? Is this a point where Washington is no longer driving control of the events anymore? It's just simply reacting to them?
Yes, actually, this is one of the big consequences of this war and why we should never have fought this war. This isn't just another Iraq. It's not another Afghanistan. It's not even another Vietnam. This escalation trap is worse and will have more devastating consequences than any that I think we have seen in American history. And the real issue here is, as I've been explaining in my writings, is that the 2026 Iran war is the inverse of the 1991 Gulf War. So when the Cold War ended in 1991, the Soviet Union receded as a major player in international politics for quite some time, and of course collapsed, and it became Russia. But it wasn't just the end of a Cold War. Immediately thereafter, in 1990, Saddam Hussein seized Kuwait and Iraq. He led Iraq, and Iraq had the fourth largest army in the world, 1 million troops in arms, and he took about half of those and invaded Kuwait. That's 42 divisions. They had just come out of the Iran-Iraq war for 8 years, so these are battle-hardened divisions. And it was not just taking Kuwait, but Saddam Hussein put his forces right up on the Kuwaiti border with Saudi Arabia, essentially threatening to take parts of Saudi Arabia. In other words, that would unify all the oil in Iraq, all the oil in Kuwait, and the oil in Saudi Arabia. That is that dreaded oil hegemon, and Iraq would control 22% or so of the world's oil. And notice that's almost identical to what Iran has effectively done. But back in 1990, the United States waged a war. It starts in January 1991, and in 43 days, a 39-day air war, a 4-day ground war, the United States kicked Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait, the most stunning victory that America had perhaps ever. It was really an amazingly stunning victory. And to give you some sense of that, we brought 10,000 body bags with us to fight that war. And how many died? 147. Now, we don't want anybody to die, but my goodness, we didn't realize how powerful we were, because what happened in that war was America rolled out this precision technology, which had not really been on display before. This was the shock and awe campaign, the stealth fighters, satellite technology, GPS. This was all new. And it was the precision revolution. Write a lot about this in my book, Bombing to Win. And I was teaching for the U.S. Air Force right at this time. So this was a stunning victory. And it wasn't stunning just for the United States. It was stunning for everybody around the world. Let me just pick China, for example. China didn't just observe these events. Before the 91 Gulf War, China had 3.5 million troops in arms. After the Gulf War, they cut it to 2 million. Think about that. Why did they dump all that? Because those were nothing but targets for our precision military. No way to stand up to America. They knew they had to turn themselves upside down to stand if they were ever going to have a chance at dealing with the United States, country after country after country. So this was the true unipolar power of the United States, the unipolar moment. And this is why those European governments cut their defense budgets, because they thought, oh, well, America, they got escalation dominance. They're going to defeat any enemy quickly. And there's no cost. This war is no cost here. So why are they building? And in fact, in the 1990s, with this amazing precision revolution, the United States cut its military budget. So this wasn't just our European allies. And so we did have forever wars. We had terrorism, of course, but those wars, Iraq and Afghanistan, except for the 9/11 attacks directly, there wasn't a major cost felt by the public. So there was no economic downturn in our forever wars. There were economic downturns in the 20 years of our forever wars. They were due to the no doc crisis for the housing crisis in 2007 and 8. But this was so what's happened in 2026 with the Iran war is the inverse of all that. The new rules of power are America can be beaten. It's not America that has escalation dominance. It's Iran that has escalation dominance. It's not America that has the precision revolution and just the high, this high-end military complex. Iran has precision power now, and it's cheap, and it can be produced en masse, and it can be produced in greater mass than America's very expensive boutique interceptors. So and then the consequences are tremendous for the United States, for the world, because of the cost of the shock to the world economy, which is only beginning. It hasn't even fully hit yet. This is the opposite of the 91 Gulf War. This is the war that is going to define the decline of American hegemony, not the rise of American preeminence. And it's creating power vacuums already. So Trump in the last week has tacoed again, right? So he made a bunch of threats and then he pulled back. And this is the fifth time, by my count, at least 5 times that I can document this precisely. And maybe there's a few more. But what has happened with those tacos is these are strategic paralysis by the United States. We are in the escalation trap. Trump is fumbling between a dilemma. He's on the horns of a dilemma. There's no good way out for him. But that paralysis is not for the United States, doesn't mean paralysis for Iran and other actors in the region. They are not paralyzed. They're going forward to gain power, try to gain more influence, because as America's power declines, it creates power vacuum. Power vacuum. And guess what? Power vacuums don't like to stay vacuums.
Mhm.
Power rivalries come in to fill the vacuums, and that's what you're seeing. That's why Iran is exerting itself to gain leverage. It's initiating attacks. That's why it's you see now Iran's proxies, the Houthis, for example, doing similar things, similar attacks with Saudi Arabia, and then you see Saudi Arabia initiating some attacks. What you are seeing is a classic situation of a spiral. This is the spiral phase of the escalation trap. Cyrus, you mentioned when we started the feeling things are getting out of control. They've been getting out of control since the very first bomb fell on February 28. Now it's just growing. And one of the reasons it's getting out of control now is as the war widens and that power vacuum continues to occur, you're getting more actors involved. And they each can independently use force. And America, they're not always calling America here to say, hey, do you mind if we do this or that? Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. And that's true of our allies, but the ones who are not our allies, the other side, they're never calling us. So, and they're not, and this isn't this necessarily highly coordinated action where Iran has now become the puppet master, pulling the strings on each and every attack. That's not quite it. What's happening is we have a power vacuum, and in the power vacuum, this is the spiral phase of the escalation trap. More and more actors are now involved. It's the United States, it's Iran, it's Israel, it's Hezbollah, it's the Houthis, it's Saudi Arabia, it's the Iran proxies in Iraq, and so what you are seeing is this phase, and it's coming because this war has some really unique characteristics, and those characteristics are devastatingly bad for the United States. And you're right, I'm a big believer in American primacy. I want America to be the richest, the strongest country in the world. And what's happening is this is going to unfortunately decline over time. So when we won that 1991 Gulf War, this wasn't just about military victory, and because some people think, oh, that's what those military folks think about. Right. No, this set up the era of globalization, which made trade a lot cheaper around the world. Trade as a fraction of world product grew from 38% in 1990 to 62% in 2020. And that's a function of that preeminent American power able to bring stability to the trading routes around the world, and more than the physical stability, the confidence that things would remain stable. That's why insurance rates are so low. That's why you could have just-in-time commercial action where, we right now, of course, outside my home in Chicago, all I have to do is push some buttons on Amazon, and within sometimes 4 hours, I mean, think about that, you get product right to the door. I mean, it's really quite stunning when you think about it. And and a lot of times, for instance, you want a table and you're going to make a table. That table's made in India. That table's made in Asia. And so it's literally the case that almost all the things that we now take for granted hinge on that cheap global commerce. Well, that's going to get much more expensive. And it's already more expensive because of the oil, the energy. People have focused on that. But this is going to ripple. This consequence is, it's not just America has lost power in the Middle East. Oh, my goodness gracious. Why did President Xi and Trump have a summit? And what does President Xi say to Trump to his face? You are a declining power.
Right.
Well, what does that mean? Power vacuum. What does that mean? More attention. Someone's going to fill that vacuum. And so you suddenly there's a lot more nervousness, so to speak. And what that means is uncertainty. And as the years go by, there's every reason to expect these consequences will simply unfold.
Professor, you've done a brilliant job of explaining that. And I want to kind of highlight on that, on the tacoing from Donald Trump, because you have a great graph that you shared on Twitter, really showing the 5 times that you've documented that Donald Trump has, in fact, tacoed out of this. Of course, the latest one was just this weekend when he said, we've assembled the largest arsenal since World War II. We're getting ready to attack. We're going to attack civilian bridges, desalination plants. I mean, every piece of infrastructure. And then, of course, it gets called off. A lot of people are saying markets, manipulation, a lot of market manipulation from inside the Trump team. But I want to ask about, this potential bombing campaign. Let's just say that Trump actually does go through with this and launches, this campaign that he's tacoed out. What would success actually look like? Is it really reopening the Strait of Hormuz, or has America's objectives already become impossible to achieve?
Well, let me answer your question about success in just 1 second. Let me just build a little bit on the 5 tacos here. And I want to make a point that on X, it's so abbreviated, it's hard to make points on X. So I just want to point out that in those 5 tacos, which you'll see go all the way back to March, it's not just that Trump didn't follow through with the threats. Notice that Iran has gained more and more power. Iran has become emboldened with each successive taco. So some people, and it's of course understandable that they focus on the tactical impact of the tacos with the stock market. Does this mean market manipulation? And it may well do. I don't know, but I have no reason to doubt that there's manipulation going on either.
Right.
But there's something broader happening as well, which is that Iran is gaining confidence. And it's gaining confidence because at each step, each taco for Iran equates to deterrence by Iran. And that means it can take another step. And if you just sort of look at Iran's shift from survival to ambition over these months, where it's gaining leverage and using it more and more in the region. I just mentioned the Houthis, for example.
Right.
What you are seeing is a real strategic negative consequence to the tacoing that is reinforcing everything else that I just explained. Now, if we talk about the what counts as success,
Correct.
so there's no doubt that that the straits of Hormuz being controlled by Iran is the core issue at the moment, even in some ways bigger than the nuclear program. Although I wouldn't take that one completely off the table, but. What would success mean? Success would mean, as President Trump is saying, that Hormuz goes back to normal. It is open in a way in which it was before February 27th, February 28th, which means normal commercial traffic going through. Now, maybe it wouldn't have to be 100% normal, 130 ships, but at least somewhere around 100, 50 in, 50 out, that sort of thing on a daily basis. That's what would count as normal. Now, who defines that, by the way? That is not defined by the President of the United States, although he or future she may say something about that. Ultimately, it's defined by commercial shippers. They're the ones who have to take the risk to go through. And right now, there are some ships getting out of Hormuz. It's basically they're escaping prison while the prison guards are shooting at them, okay? But there's very few coming back in. So there's no prison break to get into Hormuz. There's
Right.
a prison break to get out of Hormuz. And
Right.
you can see that it might be risky to take a risk to get out of Hormuz now, but is it going to be any less risky a month from now? You see, so people tracking this by how many, and even the ones getting out are very, very few. So what you are seeing here is that it's the commercial shippers themselves that define victory. Now, is it possible that the United States could physically open Hormuz to bring it back to normal? Well, the operative time frame is actually between now and the midterms. It's not between now and forever. So it's not
Right.
the military planner and say, just give me carte blanche for 10 years and I'll do this. No, it's between now and the midterms. And why is that? It's because if there is no substantial progress to opening Hormuz by the midterms, then we have every reason to believe the world's economy is going to continue to get worse, and the Democrats will then reap the benefits of this politically. They'll win one or both houses of Congress. And what has been the big Democratic mantra? End this war. And if they do control both houses of Congress, how could they end the war? The same way Congress ended the Vietnam War in 1974. See, most people don't know that the Vietnam War ended. They know that. But it's not because the president decided to end the war. Congress cut off the money in 1974. Now, it took a few more months after that because there was money in the pipeline to fully end the war. However, that's what really ended the war. There was an actual ending here by Congress. And Congress, in Article 1 of the Constitution, controls the purse. It also controls the power to make war. So this is where the real time frame is. Now, between now and the midterms, the odds of, I think, opening Hormuz are infinitesimal, so small as to be zero. And why is that? It's because the Shahed drone, the 136 Shahed drone, which is the prime tool that Iran is using to close Hormuz, is relatively small. It's about the size of a king-size mattress. This is not the size of a giant 747. It's a king-size mattress. It is relatively cheap. It's made with components, a lot like cell phone components right here. And it is has a range of between 500 and 1,200 miles. And I'll just use the shorter range here. But what that means with a range of 500 miles is that Shahed drone, again, it's about the size of a king-size mattress. That Shahed drone could be anywhere in a 500-mile by 500-mile drone launch zone along the coast of Iran, with Hormuz at the midpoint, and then still hit that ship. So that's 500 miles by 500 miles. That's huge. 1.5 times the size of California.
Wow.
And those, how many Shahed drones does Iran have? Well, they certainly have thousands. There are some counts they have tens of thousands, but they could make many hundreds. These are not that difficult to make. And we would need to shut down the number below something like 200. As my best estimate. Because if they've got 200, that's plenty to do drone swarms, and at least do enough of them over a period of weeks to make more drones. Right. So you've got to really shrink that number down. So now that's a two-dimensional scale problem, but it's worse than that, Cyrus, because there's mountains that are huge mountains called the Zagros Mountains in most of that 500 by 500 mile zone. And in those mountains, you can hide those drones, the Shahed drones, pretty much anywhere in the nooks and crevices, and of course under the mountains here. And so, and this is, again, it's about the size of the Shahed drone of a king-size mattress, except twice as heavy. It's not 10 times heavier. It's about twice as heavy as a king-size mattress. So you do need a couple guys or a couple people to carry them around, but you don't need trucks to carry them around necessarily. So what that means is that scale problem, remember I said it was 1.5 times the size of California, except it's a 3-dimensional problem as well, because those king-size mattresses could be anywhere in those mountains. And they don't have to all be stored nice and neat in one area for us to just get, hit one hit and we knock them all out. Okay, they're likely going to be dispersed here. And so think about it as the mountains are like a skyscraper, like the Empire State Building, except the Zagros Mountains are 10 times the height of the Empire State Building. Jeez. And the Empire and those drones, that king-size mattress can be in the basement of the Empire State Building. It can be on the ground floor. It could be on the 10th floor. It could be on the 17th floor. Right. You get my point. So, and so you really have to scour this. And then, do you know how many Empire State Buildings you can fit in that 500 by 500 mile area? 1.6 million.
Jeez.
This is what we're talking about. 11,000 Manhattans. That's our problem. This is why the drone hunts. Now, I can't tell you that this could never be solved, although I'm pretty sure it's probably not. Okay, but it's certainly not going to get solved in the next 3 months. At a minimum, it's a 3 to 6 month mission here, and it might not be solvable at that because it's just the scale is just too big to suppress Iran for the drone suppression that we need. That is the fundamental. I think this is actually, Cyrus, the $64,000 issue that needs to be brought to the public because the public knows things aren't going well, okay? And they sort of have the idea now of geography. We often criticize Americans, they don't know their geography, but I think a lot of Americans know where Iran is roughly, and they know even Hormuz. The scale of what we're talking about to open Hormuz, and you got all these generals going on talking about how they can do this, including former CENTCOM commanders and other commanders-in-chief, SINCs they're called. Okay, yeah, let's see them discuss this in some depth here, as opposed to the one-liner. Let's really get into the operational details here. And I think once you sort of lift the hood on the operational details, you see right away, scale is the problem. It's not whether our folks are brave. It's not whether we're smart. We have the best, and I taught these folks, man, my goodness, I am nothing but impressed with our military. Here at the tactical level, okay? But what we're asking them to do, this is a mission that is, this just beyond, I think, anybody. It's not just U.S., it's just beyond capabilities here. And this is why Iran has the upper hand. And it is gaining that upper hand more and more because each taco by Trump is persuading everybody that they're just going to have to side with Iran. You see, I mean, what really are they going to do? I mean, you recently heard I think it was yesterday, Britain, the UK said, oh, no, Iran, we're not getting in this war. Don't go shoot your missiles at us. Okay, this is the sign of what I'm describing. It's not because there's an ideological affinity between Britain and the IRGC or the revolutionary ideology of Iran. It's the other way around. This is happening despite the ideological differences here. And so what you are seeing is power. Balance of power is really driving the train. And if we don't take this seriously, then all these delusional or illusions of how we're going to have a madman theory and we just need to understand that it makes us feel comforted right now, Cyrus, to think, oh, we're going to get out of this. Okay. We're America. We get into sticky wickets and we get out of them. But the way we get out of them is not in an instant, because we wouldn't be in them in an instant. And number two, it's not by sticking our head in the sand and pretending these problems are not there. We started to turn the forever war in Iraq around after 3 solid years of failure, okay, of things getting worse. It took 3 years. And it was advising the Bush administration on this, and it took several years. And then it was hard to do it well and really get out. Here for other political reasons. But the bottom line is that by taking seriously the arguments I was making, others were making at the time about the actual problems, that is what the Bush administration finally did. And things did get better. And so people say, well, why are you talking about all the problems? No, you're not. This is not this is America's strength to identify the problems. This is how we become the great America in the future. Sticking your head in the sand, that's what the Soviet Union did for 40 years. And look what happened to the Soviet Union. That's what Gaddafi did for 40 years. Okay, you start sticking your head in the sand. Now you're not just losing an empire, you're losing your country.
Yeah, absolutely. Professor Pape, I've got one final question for you as we wrap up today's interview. And again, I just so thank you for your time, your knowledge. I mean, this is a great session for me as well, just because I get to learn from one of the best minds. And I'm just so, honored to have you on our show, and, just so glad I can share this message with the world. But, one thing you have said is that we need to ignore the political headlines, which there's certainly a lot, and we really need to watch the strategic indicators. So I want you to tell our audience out there, what are the one or two things that we need to be watching in the future as this escalation trap continues to spiral out of control? What are you going to be watching specifically in the next couple of months?
Yeah, there's two big things to really track. Number one is the times that Iran initiates the use of force. We're so used to thinking this is tit for tat or Iran is retaliating. We've become sort of baked in that, well, Trump started this war, Trump and Israel started the war. So therefore, if only they would stop, then that's all you need to do. It's just Trump just has to stop launching attacks and the war is over. The world's economy is saved, et cetera, et cetera. Well, as I've been trying to explain, Iran is moving from survival to ambition and also revenge. So the first thing to notice here is the initiative is happening by Iran. It's been happening more and more. And so I think people need to pay attention to that. And some people just don't, because they keep wanting to, and I'm not trying to let Trump off the hook. That's not it. You hear me. I'm not letting him off the hook. I'm trying to understand what's happening. So we need to understand that. The second thing is, are we actually moving troop forces out of the region? I don't mean assembling them from a frontline base like Qatar to further away bases in Jordan, Israel, and then apparently, from what I'm hearing now, Egypt, even maybe even Turkey. But we want to know whether those forces are actually coming home, because this may be the ultimate price that has to be paid in order to have any semblance of ending Iran's attacks in the next 3 months, is that all of American troops come out. I would not advocate for that at the moment. I would like to see if we could develop still a longer term balancing policy here. But the truth is that those days are quickly passing us, because we have continued to make strategic mistake after strategic mistake. And you can and as you make those mistakes, you got to pay the prices for it, usually in terms of power.
Yeah, absolutely. Professor Pape, where can we find more of your work? I know we mentioned the Substack. We're going to put that down below. Anything else you want to let our viewers?
Draft of Iran's strategic plan for managing the Strait of Hormuz, a bombshell that was dropped directly on Trump as he's been waiting for some kind of deal to happen over many days now. This deal is very significant, the draft in particular, because not only does it solidify Iran's control over the Strait of Hormuz and all corridors that will be used, but also it carries violation fees of up to 20% of the cargo value, and will exclude U.S., Israeli, and all hostile vessels from use of the Strait of Hormuz, which is incredibly significant and a big blow to Trump. Now, also, the Telegraph has said that these recent leaks out of Oman and Iran all point in one direction, that the agreement between Iran and Oman to reopen the strait is not only sealed, but also ensures that we know that the U.S. has lost this war. Iran keeps on hitting tankers in the Strait of Hormuz, 2 in the last 24 hours, as these ships try to violate this emerging agreement. And this is also big news. $0 worth of Saudi oil has been imported to the United States for the first time, I think, in history since the two had bilateral ties. This comes in the month of July. Saudi Arabia is also on fire as Yemen has targeted a major military facility there in the Narjan region, which I believe is part of Yemen, actually. But you can correct me, Pepe, if I'm wrong. There's been dozens of casualties in the last 24 hours by Yemen against Saudi-backed forces. And what you talked to me before the show, Pepe, the Turkey, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia joint Mecca defense deal. Sorry, I didn't have it up. Joint defense deal has been signed. We don't really actually know what is in this agreement, but it comes amid this emerging and burgeoning and escalating war of resistance by Yemen against Saudi Arabia. So, Pepe, how about we begin with the Strait of Hormuz deal and work our way here? What is going on now? It appears Iran is really solidifying its leverage, and Donald Trump is very silent about this, at least in terms of how these terms do not look favorable to the United States. Your thoughts?
Well, it's a lot to digest, and we have 1 hour. No? It's a lot to digest because this new configuration of the chessboard simultaneously, the signing of this Sunni NATO pact in Mecca by Erdogan, MBS, and Sharif, Prime Minister of Pakistan. There's an outstanding photo, the three of them looking at Mecca across the walls, across the whatever, the mirrors or whatever, the window, I'm sorry, across the window, after they had signed and prayed looking at Mecca. So the symbology, of course, will resonate all across the lands of Islam. But you may be sure that in the Arab street, in the streets of Islam, in the Arab world, in Central Asia, in Southeast Asia, popular opinion overwhelmingly will be looking at these three and basically saying these people are not real Muslims. These are interlopers. They are not real leaders. In terms of popular support across the Muslim world, they are at rock bottom. We can venture to say the three of them, especially MBS. Well, okay, to get there, let's start, as you mentioned, with a fact on the negotiating table. In fact, by the way, the only active negotiating table this past few days, which was the technical negotiating table between Iranian officials and Omani officials. And they were ready to announce that they were about to clinch a deal, and it will be before Friday. So the deal is practically clinched. The agreement between Muscat and Tehran is practically clinched. In fact, in our channel, Transition Protocol, Larry and I, from the beginning of the week, we were already talking about that and saying, no, this is going to happen this week. And, that seems to be the case. It is groundbreaking, doesn't even begin to explain it. And in terms of a de facto strategic defeat of the United States, this is really mind-boggling territory. Essentially, everyone sailing into the Strait of Hormuz will have to follow Iranian territorial waters, authorization by the IRGC Navy, paying the required fees to the PGSA, the new body that regulates navigation in the Persian Gulf, official Iranian body, of course. And on the way out, there will be two layers. The first layer of control will be Omani, and they will receive their own fees as well. And the second layer is a final authorization, once again, by Iran. So to put it very, very, in a very simple way, very straight to the point, of course, it's a bit reductionist, but it gives all of you the gist of the whole thing. To enter Hormuz, 100% Iranian control. To exit Hormuz, roughly 50 to 70% Iranian control. That's what it is in practice. Signed, sealed, and delivered by both sides. This is not a unilateral Iranian decision. Very, very important, which will be part of the final draft. And expect discombobulations, serial discombobulations from Mar-a-Lago to Washington, D.C. It's verboten territory for U.S. and Israeli ships and for ships of hostile nations. This means those that were part of the U.S.-Israel combo during the 40-day war. And there's the matter of paying reparations, extra fees, the 20% extra fee. This is not clear yet. But if this agreement is signed, sealed, and delivered for good between today, tomorrow, this week, and maximum Monday between Muscat and Tehran, wow, this is sealing, for all practical purposes, the de facto on the ground and on the seas strategic defeat of the United States. So you can imagine the consequences, right? And it's quite telling that for the moment, there's basically silence coming from Washington, apart from the usual odd vociferations, but basically silence. And intersecting with this decision, which is something that Iranians kept emphasizing throughout the week, Iran, via members of parliament, via the Minister of Foreign Relations, everybody, advisors to leader Mojtaba Khamenei, they were saying, there's only one negotiation going on at the moment, and it's a technical negotiation between us and Oman about the Strait of Hormuz. There's nothing else. Translation, our old friend, the MOU dead cat, continued to be dead. By all practical purposes, it was in deep coma, dead or alive, but as in a Hollywood movie, could be resuscitated, as every serial killer is, but essentially dead. And this is why it was dead and why the Iranians were not making any move about it. First of all, because according to the Iranian interpretation, the MOU was blown up by Donald Trump. So there's only one way to go back to the MOU. If the United States starts to fulfill the commitments of the MOU, everybody knows the 14 points. In the sub-Saharan Africa, they are discussing the 14 points. Everybody knows about it. And the Americans didn't deliver anything. So what's going to be, especially after this new code of navigation rules across the Strait of Hormuz approved by Iran and Oman, what's going to be Trump's reaction? Number one. Number two, what's going to be the reaction of CENTCOM and company? Nobody knows. What's going to be the reaction of other GCC members which need to use the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz? And now we see, interacting with all these unknown answers, the coming in Mecca of Sunni NATO. And that, Danny, is, wow. Talk about something beyond dodgy. We have a Muslim nuclear power. We have the second largest NATO army. And we have the unlimited funds of the House of Saud together in an agreement that nobody has read, and there were no leaks about it because nobody knows what's really inside this agreement, except the NATO-style Article 5 paragraph that says essentially an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. In fact, the official rhetoric so far, if I remember correctly, is armed attack, in case of an armed attack. Okay, let's see the immediate probability right in front of us. Ansar Allah and the Yemeni armed forces responded to Saudi provocations and a Saudi de facto attack on Yemen, and they will continue to respond on not only 2-1, but even more, 3-1, 4-1, 5-1. Does that constitute a grounds for this Sunni NATO pact to be enforced? Nobody knows. And if it is, imagine the scenario of the Pakistani Air Force and NATO, Turkish NATO assets being used side by side with Saudi Arabia to bomb Yemen, a member of the Axis of Resistance. How can they possibly explain that to Tehran? How can Pakistan possibly explain that to Tehran, considering that so far they have been acting de facto as mediators between Iran and the US? With, by the way, according to the Pakistani mediators, support in the background from Saudi Arabia. In very, very important, if we go back to the real beginning, which is before the Islamabad 1.0 meeting, where we had Ghalibaf and J.D. Vance. The first, we have to always repeat that, because the first, let's say, Sunni NATO axis, or even Sunni, was a meeting in Islamabad where we had Pakistan, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, the three that signed the NATO-style thing in Mecca today, and Egypt. So why Egypt is not part of this thing that was signed in Mecca? Nobody has an answer for that yet. And it would be nice to hear something from Cairo about all that. Is this pact basically conceptualized against Israel, against CENTCOM and Israel, against Iran, or all of the above? No answers so far. So this can go a long way to highway to hell territory, but just like that, in fact. And I would like to try to ask this question today to our friends in Yemen, or if they can answer during the weekend, possibly. How is Sana watching this Sunni NATO pact in Mecca? Do they see it as directly against Ansar Allah and the Yemeni armed forces? Are they expecting a Saudi offensive backed by Turkey and Pakistan tomorrow? So this complicates the chessboard to a degree that Danny, we cannot even begin to understand what's going on. It's very, very, very dodgy, the whole thing. And why today? Timing as well. Why today? Because they knew that the new rules for the Strait of Hormuz were practically sealed. And they wanted, of course, to, change the narrative, which is a typical Trump administration tactic. Did they communicate with Trump beforehand? Did they tell the White House beforehand that, look, we have a new NATO in town, and it's not yours? So for the moment, we only have questions and absolutely no answers from anywhere. The only thing we know is this looks like another pass towards the big, big highway to the mother of all hells ahead of us.
Right. Yeah. Well,
Danny, give me your interpretation. Your first interpretation.
Yeah. Oh, well, all of these developments feel like a kind of outside of the Iran sphere, and it feels like Iran, Ansar Allah, they're obviously moving in very strategic ways, especially Iran with this new deal. But with Turkey has been is seemingly trying to keep its nose out of, at least publicly, what's been happening in West Asia with regard to Iran and the Strait of Hormuz and all of this. But Saudi Arabia, and with the U.S.'s hand in this, I'm wondering if this is kind of a desperate scramble to create some kind of security architecture to what's about to happen, which is that Iran, first of all, Saudi Arabia is going to get its butt kicked by Yemen, which is already happening. And second of all, the Strait of Hormuz, and now you have the Bab el-Mandeb Strait being tied up. We know that all three of these countries, even Pakistan, which has been playing mediator role, but we know that it wants things to go to some kind of pleasant status quo. I'm wondering if this is some kind of desperate scramble to insert themselves in influencing dynamics. But I am confused about how that will happen, given that the United States has a huge hand, obviously, in what Saudi Arabia does. We're seeing that in many respects with Saudi Arabia bombing the Iraqi resistance and Yemen as well. We know the U.S. greenlit that, and that they're having strange back and forths about what they should be doing there. And they're all very concerned about Iran, especially Turkey and Saudi Arabia. So it's a very curious thing, but it seems like a desperate scramble to respond to developments more than go on any kind of offensive. And I remember this, Pepe, it used to be said in the mainstream media, and this is just actually from a few days ago, that a lot of former U.S. officials are saying that what Iran is doing here with the Strait of Hormuz is more powerful than a nuclear bomb itself. So I wouldn't be surprised if that kind of alarm is also going through these Mecca states, these so-called Gulf states, and Turkey and Pakistan. I could see that the UAE supposedly struck a deal with Iran clandestinely to move their oil out through the Fallujah asset. So there's a lot of moving parts here, but it does seem like a response to this changing architecture that I know you've been covering so well. So Pepe, back to you.
Yes. It's interesting because I think a few weeks ago, maybe 4, 5, 6 weeks ago, one of the Pakistani mediators, he told Larry and myself, and we didn't believe him, of course, because there's no evidence. But he said, look, wait a few months. The UAE will be coming to us and will be coming to the table. There are already a few signs that they are already approaching the Pakistani mediators and, just like probing the terrain, because they know that they cannot antagonize Iran anymore. Iran is the emerging and now de facto big power in West Asia, period. Everybody has to live with that, especially their neighbors. Extra reason, there's a lot of Iranian money moving in all sectors of business, especially in Dubai. There is a back and forth that never ended and will never end. So they need an accommodation. And of course, they need an accommodation because they need to escape retribution for what they did to Iran during the war. And Iran kept tabs. They know everything that UAE used to attack Iranian targets. So there will be blood. There's got to be retribution. They could negotiate, the UAE could negotiate the retribution, or the retribution will be granted cash funds from the UAE. That's another story. But Saudi Arabia, wow, their margin of maneuver is extremely limited. If, for instance, would occur to MBS's calculations, and that's complicated because guess who taught MBS to think geopolitically? MBZ. MBS learned about geopolitics from the bigger guy. So this is not good at all, right? No. And now, okay, are they willing to pick up a long fight against Yemen again, considering that they lost the previous one? Are they willing to sacrifice practically their whole oil industry because they know that when the Yemeni armed forces that they respond, it's really hardcore, and they are ready to go all the way hardcore? Are they dragging Pakistan into their own war? The Pakistanis, as far as we know, until today in Mecca, they told via their mediators to the Saudis, look, back off. You're not going to drag us into your war against Yemen. The problem is they signed this thing today in Mecca. De facto, Pakistan has been dragged into anything that Saudi Arabia decides to do against Yemen. So this will be one of the big questions that Larry and I will have to our sources in Pakistan, like in 1 hour from now. We'll have a list of questions already. Okay, can you please explain your position with this Mecca thing and what you're going to actually do if Saudi Arabia restarts a war against Yemen? Or if Saudi Arabia decides to bomb the PMUs, the People Mobilization Units in Iraq, again, as they did, side by side with the US? Are you going to attack Iraq? So the Pakistani position today, starting today, became absolutely unbearable. Unbearable. And we really want to see what they're going to answer. And there's no way they can defend signing a pact and being dragged into other people's wars. Turkey is different. Turkey, we know how Erdogan works. And all of us who spend time in Turkey, and I keep cultivating my good friends in Ankara and in Istanbul. They said, he always hedging, and he will always hedge about anything. So this is another hedging movement. Maybe it's inconsequential, but the repercussions of the actual signing, they are extremely consequential. They have to think about that. And of course, all the positioning considering the new rules of the game in West Asia, which are basically dictated by Iran. And nobody can do that. Even militarily, you cannot change that. So, once again, no answers ahead, but the chessboard became even more complicated than it was 24 hours ago. And of course, the possibility of a return to the MOU, the Bad Cat MOU, after Muscat and Tehran clinched this deal on, which, by the way, this is important. It's temporary. So if the Trump administration freaks out, Oman, they have a dialogue with, more indirect than direct, but they have a dialogue with the White House as well. They can always say, look, it's temporary. When you sit down with the Iranians, then you and Iran are going to have to discuss the Strait of Hormuz again. But for the moment, this is our own agreement, bilateral. Both states on both sides of the Strait of Hormuz. Makes perfect sense. So obviously, Saudi Arabia is looking at it, Turkey is looking at it. They say, no, we need to do something. And they come up with this Mecca thing. Wow.
Well, I think it's so striking, Pepe, that, as you said, there are no answers coming out of these states signing this, as you call it, Sunni NATO pact. And Donald Trump also appears to have no answers for what's happening. And I'll just play this briefly, this 10 seconds or so.
About
the Strait of Hormuz. No, he said nothing about this. And
nothing about the Sunni NATO. Okay.
And his line is on the Strait of Hormuz right now is getting also very ambiguous. Here's what he said about the status of it.
Well, I don't want to say it has been. It's sort of open right now. We have a thing called the blockade headed up by the U.S. Navy, and we control it. And now we control it, but they can always shoot something. They always have something or drop a mine. And if you
So very ambiguous, very idiotic in many ways, but at the same time,
idiotic. This answer is totally idiotic.
Wow. They control the strait. 0 ships are coming through in and out of the strait unless Iran says they can go through. I think something like 10 in the last week, something so ridiculously small. But at the same time, I think the fact that you have those questions about a very specific thing like Yemen with regard to the Sunni NATO alliance now. And I think it is very curious that players like Pakistan, like Turkey, we know Saudi Arabia is off its whatever right now, being pushed from all sides and pulled from all sides to, they're bad at hedging, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And so they're increasingly getting into war with Ansarallah, which they'll lose. But if Pakistan and Turkey don't get behind it now that they're in the Sunni NATO alliance defense pact, is it worth the paper that it's signed on? I mean, it just feels like, what is the point of this if not to directly intervene on matters like the Strait of Hormuz, like Yemen, like the regional situation? And is it to the behest of the United States, which we know Turkey, they like to play all sides. We know it has a close military relationship with the United States, but also it has its own regional ambitions. Pakistan obviously has its own ambitions, even though it works closely with the United States. Saudi Arabia, same way. But what role is the U.S. playing in all this, I wonder, given that all of these parties are very valuable to the U.S. in terms of trying to get their say pushed through in terms of influence in the future, which is waning dramatically, as we just covered with the Strait of Hormuz. It's gone. It's over. They have none. They can't dictate terms on that. So your thoughts on this, though, about what the U.S. role could be behind the scenes?
I can see a lot of generals, military officials are running around like cockroaches in rooms in Washington and in CENTCOM. Really. They probably don't understand what this is all about and what is going to be their role. They can even, if they are paranoid enough, and many are, say, is this thing against us? Could be. Could be Turkey, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia preventing a possible CENTCOM intervention. Could be, of course. Certainly, when they think about armed attack, long term, we have to think the death cult, Israel, no question. If, once again, questions. If there was an Iranian angle, and considering that Pakistan is directly involved, and Turkey, which was supporting the Pakistani mediation and so-called, road to the peace process via the MOU so far, they are involved. Obviously, there's no way they can explain to Iran that this also involves Iran. And obviously, there won't be an armed attack by Iran against Pakistan, absolutely out of the question. Against Saudi Arabia would be to defend Yemen if the Yemenis ask, which they won't because they're self-sufficient. And there won't be an Iranian attack against Turkey. This is ridiculous. So once again, the only crisis point is Saudi Arabia and Yemen. So it's up to the Saudis they have to make up their minds finally. Do they respect their own memorandum of understanding with the Yemen, or do they restart a war that they lost? And the memorandum of understanding, which I think is 2019, is because they were losing the war. It was after after Yemen bombed Abqaiq in 2019. And then the Saudis said, no, please stop it. So they want to go back to that. Do they want to lose the East-West pipeline? Do they want to lose Yanbu? Do they want to be blocked in the Red Sea? So it's, once again, MBS decision. And Turkey and Pakistan, they are clever enough not to get involved because this is strictly between Saudi Arabia and Yemen. And the position of Ansarallah and the Yemeni armed forces at the moment is that, okay, they're observing all that with a smirk, say, okay, let's see if they attack us again. Of course, there will be 2-1, 3-1, 4-1 retribution. Do they expect Saudi Arabia and, Pakistan and Turkey to intervene? Once again, huge question. But considers that the Yemenis fear no one, literally. They have no fear. And when you go there, Danny, you talk to them, you see Sana, you were driven to the mountains to see Sada, you see the burst of Ansarallah, you talk to the local people. So, no, don't mess with these guys, please. Do yourself a favor. They don't fear no one. So once again, the whole thing, with or without the three of them in Mecca, boils down to MBS being reasonable and diplomatic and trying to solve the problem with the Yemen diplomatically. They could have help from Pakistan and from Turkey for that matter, but on a diplomatic level. Iran, it's not, this is not a NATO against Iran, essentially. First of all, because the Pakistanis will have to explain to Tehran in detail why they signed this thing. Otherwise, the Iranians said, okay, you're not mediators anymore, bye. That's it. And all the leverage that Pakistan gained these past 2 months disappears like that, completely. They are doing that for their own reasons, of course. They're doing because China basically approached Islamabad and said, you as mediators have to break your backs to get these two back on the table. So that's the role of China. Number two, they are doing it because they need more visibility, more respectability, and very, very important, energy. And energy will come from Iran. So that's why, for instance, Iran is under pressure. They open 6 or 7 overland connectivity corridors between their borders to facilitate Iranian exports, not only to Pakistan, but to China via Pakistan. That's why you have the guy from the National Iranian Oil Company visiting Islamabad to discuss what? The Iran-Pakistan gas pipeline, which Pakistan needs badly for over a decade. And they could never get it because of American interference. So now it's, possibilities just around the corner. So obviously, Pakistan, they have their reasons. And of course, in terms of their geopolitical presence across Eurasia and across the global south, it's huge. You are the official mediators, the top mediators between the US and Iran. So obviously, for them, it's, but of course, they do this essentially for their own national security reasons and for their own national interests. So it's very easy for Tehran to, just Arakchi was supposed to be in Islamabad today. He's not because Shehbaz Sharif went to Mecca. So this thing was kept under wraps until today, Danny. There was not an expectation that something would be signed in Mecca because there were 2 trips that they were trying to coordinate the calendar. One of them is Arakchi arriving in Islamabad. The information that we received beginning of the week is, look, Arakchi is going to be in Islamabad on Friday. But then the whole thing changed because the new information was that Munir and Shehbaz Sharif would travel to Saudi Arabia to meet MBS. But there was nothing about signing the Sunni NATO thing. Nothing. This came out of the blue today. Everybody was, what?
Yeah. Well, you posted Iran's response, or at least someone in Ibrahim Raizeh.
This is via a member of parliament, Danny. Yeah. We should not read that as an official response.
But
no. But I think it's what they are thinking, essentially.
Yeah, I think somehow, even though it won't be an official response, because I don't even know if Iran has a big opinion as a collective, but in terms of a lot of Iranians in parliament and outside of parliament, I would say Saudis must know that a paper agreement with Turkey and Pakistan will not bring them security, just as years of one-sided nursing to the Americans did not bring them security. Reform your policies so that you do not need to beg security from others. I mean, I think that's a very logical
analysis. That's just very Iranian. It's super logical, straight to the point, and based on facts.
Right. No lies told, as they say, right? I mean, that's it. And Iran has the resume to show it. Or not once has Iran begged anybody, including Russia and China, which, as you know, on this program and in programs that you do and work that you do, Pepe, a lot of people ask, well, why don't they ask for more from Russia? Why don't they get more from Russia and China? Why don't Russia and China help them more? And a lot of it is that they're not really begging anybody for to save them. They'll work with Russia and China, but they won't. Yeah, so they and then look at what they've been able to accomplish. So
it's not how the strategic relationships agreements, like, you know, one of the things that I learned on the spot in Moscow for the past few years when there were Iranian delegations in Moscow. Both sides, they were saying, look, we are open to anything. If you need anything, just ask. And this went both ways. You know, way before the war this year, they were already exchanging information and help and support at the highest level, at the Ministry of Defense level, way beyond Ministry of Foreign Relations, all the way to the leaders. This was, you know, conversations between Putin and Khamenei. They used to talk a lot. They were always in close contact. So this is how the strategic relationship works. In terms of China and Iran, it's even more subtle because when something happens, it's already there. Because the Chinese never advertise what they do, never. It's always in the shade, it's always discreet. And of course, in terms of a strategic relationship, for them, Iran is a matter of national security in terms of energy. That's why they don't have a 25-year agreement with anybody, only with Iran. And it's energy infrastructure that Iran badly needs and energy that China badly needs, and they can pay in yuan. One of the reasons of the February 28th war. And now that we are getting to the point, the whole point of the war, which was never the nuclear dossier. It's an oil war. It's a control of oil checkpoint war. It's a control of an oil checkpoint that was using the petro-yuan. Anathema, total anathema for the United States. Sovereign independent nation, allied with the top two powers in Eurasia. So there are the list of reasons to start a war against Iran from an American side are, you know, infinite. But obviously, you don't launch a war like that without pre-planning, carefully, detailing. And what do you plan to, if things go downhill, which they did practically immediately, what's your plan B or C? Or there was nothing. So no wonder we are in the situation where by the end of this week, we could have an agreement between both nations side by side of the Strait of Hormuz, basically saying, look, the new rules of the game are these, and we set them. And everybody has to comply, including the United States.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's not hard for the United States to comply, and if we take it in a vacuum, because they're completely out of it. But you know,
yes.
all they have to do is sit back and let it happen. But of course, we know that this is not possible for the Empire of Chaos. Pepe, we have some audience questions. Let's get to a member's question from Coyetezino. Sorry if I'm butchering that. Hi, everyone. From Brazil, guys, why does the MOU not contemplate the end of the genocide by Israel in Gaza? Pepe, what are your thoughts on this? Because you've been talking about the MOU for quite a long time. What's your thoughts?
These are two different issues. It's immensely important for Gaza. It's cosmically important for Iran. What is in the MOU already in paragraph 1 means end of all wars. And inside this end of, or inbuilt in this end of all wars, is the war by the death cult against Gaza and the West Bank. Absolutely. But this would have to be discussed separately. There are too many, ultra hardcore issues in the MOU, and this would be lost in the shuffle. This would be part of a larger negotiation. And of course, it will have to involve the death cult itself, which does not negotiate with anybody, as all of you know. They kill people. The only thing that they know is to actually kill people. But very important, it is part of the MOU. End of all wars means end of all wars against Palestine, against Lebanon, against Yemen, against Iraq, and against Iran. It's quite clear. But obviously the Americans did not interpret that because the language is very vague. The language of the MOU was on purpose extremely vague, which is, it's a Pandora's box of interpretations.
Yeah, and the United States, the United States didn't abide by it for, it seemed like, a single minute. So there were some sanctions lifted for a little bit there. There was obviously some moves maybe to open up the blockade, but it was never serious, and it lasted for a very short period of time. But Arachi did say around that period that they would eventually be negotiating specifics around specific conflicts, including Gaza. So for me, it seemed like the specifics of part of these, as you said, ambiguities with the MOU terms were supposed to be addressed in the actual negotiations, but the MOU was supposed to be terms that were followed immediately in terms that were quite clear. Lebanon was specifically cited, and then of course all the sanctions and the money, the frozen assets, all of that. That was supposed to happen right away, but it didn't. And so
you remember when we were on the verge of $6 billion being transferred from Qatar? We were literally on the verge of the money transfer, and the Americans blocked it at the last, literally at last minute. Probably somebody was about to press click, and no, not anymore. Yeah.
But they were playing games. So I think this is the big problem about addressing any direct conflict specifically, is that the party on the other side they're not serious. And so that's where we are. But Fazan Nadim says, is China happy with Pakistan's diplomacy? Pepe, what do you think?
This is it's a complicated answer. We should not use happy, especially when it comes to China.
Right.
We should use, is this satisfying China's national interest and overall geopolitical interests? For the moment, yes, because the most important part of the answer to your question, the Chinese are coordinating in the background the whole Pakistani mediation effort. This is immensely important. They never show up. The Chinese diplomacy is, in terms of sophistication, when they are dealing with ultra hardcore dossiers like this one, which involves Chinese national security and the interpretation by the highest levels, Politburo level, all the way to Xi Jinping from the beginning, they interpreted starting even before February 28th and right at the beginning, this is a war against us. After Iran is Russia, after Russia is us. And we are the number one strategic threat to the Americans, the way they see us. So obviously, from the beginning, the decision was made in Beijing. We will do everything it takes not to let Iran fall or fold or give up or be shattered. So the conduit after the negotiations, the process leading to possible negotiations started, was Pakistan. And for instance, the most right at the beginning, we have to come back right to the beginning, because this explains a lot of what happened afterwards, but also it does not explain a lot of what happened after, which was the first meeting of the four Sunnis. The four Sunnis were three that signed the Mecca Agreement today: Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey, plus Egypt. These four, they met in Islamabad. and they discussed what can we do to maybe start a peace process? Can we talk to Iran? How do we talk to Iran? Which one of us will talk to Iran? And all that. Guess what happened the day after? The foreign minister of Pakistan goes to Beijing immediately after the meeting of the four Sunnis to talk to Wang Yi. And Wang Yi says, look, this is not good enough. Try harder. We support. If you are trying to get towards, let's say, the road towards a peace process, we support everything because this is what we want. And this is what we have been saying loudly everywhere. China wants a solution, a Pacific, peaceful. I have the Pacific Ocean in mind. A peaceful diplomatic solution for Iran, U.S., according to the UN Charter and all that. The usual Chinese, posture. But they started to cultivate Pakistan as the top mediator, and that's why these past 2 months, essentially, we have this alignment between Beijing, Islamabad, and Tehran, based on mutual trust and based on their shared objectives. So for the moment, we can say that, yes, this is what the Chinese totally support the MOU from the beginning. In fact, they were part of the negotiations in the background as well. The problem is they knew that the other side would never respect it. The Chinese also have experience with the Americans on broken promises. So from now on, if the dead cat is finally resuscitated for the umpteenth time, the Chinese will support it. No question. The problem is the Pakistanis have to make very clear to the Chinese and to the Iranians what is their role now after they sign this Mecca fog of war thing. Changes a lot. And they're going to have to do a lot of explaining in Islamabad.
Yeah. Well, in terms of China's thoughts and feelings about things, I think you're exactly right. China is more about interests and strategy, and also it is playing this very much at a far away kind of role where it is not really. Pakistan has Pakistan's politics, which are very complex and complicated, and
very complicated.
Pakistan will play the role that it can play, and China will always support anything positive that Pakistan can do, not least because Pakistan is, number 2 in terms of partnership with China in the region, maybe number 1 in terms of overall economic development and cooperation.
In Belt and Road are the number 1.
With CPEC.
Absolutely.
And, with, right there with Iran, Iran maybe plays a far more geopolitically significant partnership with China. But nevertheless, I think, China is going to support both of those in doing something positive around this war. And I agree with you 100%. Those MOU terms, China sees as positive. So why wouldn't it throw any kind of weight that it can outside of interfering in the process, which it does not, it's not. There's no point to that.
And there's another element, Danny. The Chinese are always saying that everything is in the MOU. There's nothing to renegotiate,
right?
Which is exactly the Iranian position. Look, all the points are there. It was signed by both presidents. Now you have to fulfill the commitments. And the Chinese support that 1,000,000%. Now there's nothing else to negotiate. Everything is there. You have to start negotiating point by point and fulfill your commitments. Give them the money back, relief of sanctions, start discussing about Lebanon, everything.
Yep. Well, it reminds me what you just said there, Pepe, of what Mohammed Ghalibaf said on X recently. I think this was the last 24 hours. He said, he mocks Trump, saying, massive attack coming. Wait, never mind. They want to negotiate, end quote. That's theater diplomacy on loop. Using bullying plus broken promises plus fake news as leverage is a failed strategy. acknowledge the facts and fulfill your commitments. We don't need more theater. So that was a direct message
Straight
to
to
the
the
world
point.
and to
See,
Trump. Yep.
commitments and theater. Perfect. It's very, very Persian, logical.
Right. Right.
And, you know, fact and fiction. They're very good at contraposing fact and fiction. Mhm.
Yeah, so that's where we are, Pepe. Well, maybe in the last 5 or so minutes that we're here, maybe where are we and what do you expect coming next down the bend now that it is becoming quite clear that Iran is looking to solidify at least this part of the MOU, the Strait of Hormuz question, completely and entirely outside of any kind of U.S. participation. So what do you see coming down the bend, given that that's going to come in the next, hours, days at the most?
Could be today. Now is
Late out there,
at
right?
night
It's like-
already in the Middle East, so maybe not today. It could be Saturday. Saturday is a normal working day in Muslim countries, or it could be on Monday, right?
Okay.
But once this agreement is signed, well, it changes. Even if it's temporary, we have to remember, all of you, this is a temporary agreement. Even then, this is a stepping stone for, you know, what they're going to be discussing if the MOU that cat is resuscitated. And it's following Iran's planning, I would say, almost to the millimeter. Don't forget that the margin of maneuver for the Americans is shrinking by the day. Next week is the deadline for the strategic petroleum reserves, the depletion, mid-August. It's next week, literally around the corner.
Right.
Not to mention, we ran out of everything. That's patriots, you know, but we run out of everything.
Yeah,
But
the
how-
economic situation is so bad here in the United States, and it's very bad. But continue, sorry.
How much is a gallon of gas in New York now? Do you know?
Right now, it's over $4 still. I mean, it's not going down. This is the big
California
problem.
is 6 something.
That's
Yeah.
for regular. So diesel,
Regular. Yeah.
which is you could consider that the business, right? The trucking. Diesel
Yes.
gas is $5.50, close to $6. It's very bad. I mean, it's close to levels of what we had at the worst of the worst on the East Coast. The West Coast was always much worse, but in the East Coast,
right.
you had $5 regular, $5.50 regular, and for diesel over 6, 7. You had these astronomical, but it hasn't gone down that much, and it likely won't. And that's where the big crisis is that they're all trying to hide, is the fact that the results of the economic catastrophe, that the U.S. and Israelis decision to go to war with Iran, those are kind of written in stone. A lot of that is not reversible. But anyway, back to you.
True, absolutely, yes.
Right.
Oof, wow.
So.
Well, okay.
So-
Look, we're gonna try to get some answers already tonight. So if we have some breakthrough, we should talk again next week.
We will,
Danny, about the Sunni NATO thing.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, we'll definitely talk.
Everything, yeah, and of course, what the Yemenis are gonna do.
Yeah, well, things are burning. It seems like Yemen is looking to do as much harm as possible to Saudi Arabia, to get Saudi Arabia to just give up. Give it up as quickly as Saudi Arabia can. That's that seems to be because Yemen is now hit. Yemen's basically getting rid of it. Almost reminds me of what Iran is doing with the Iraqi so-called proxies, right? The Kurdish proxies in Iraq.
The Kurdish proxies.
They just hit them and hit them and hit them, and now what did Mossad do?
You bet.
What did Mossad just do? Mossad just fired a bunch of leaders because they are angry that they couldn't get the Kurds to play this role, not only in Iran, but in the Iraqi border, because of Iran just kept on hitting them. And now it seems like Yemen's doing the same thing in Yemen on the Saudi border. Just hit those proxies. They are, they are running away, retreating, and we'll see if Saudi Arabia keeps this up. I don't know. Your final words to the audience, Pepe, as we
Welcome back. Trita Parsi joins us today, the Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. And I would, again, highly advise anyone to follow his Substack. And I've left a link in the description. And, well, part of our talk today is actually about some of your articles, which I find very interesting. So, well, let me start by thanking you for coming on the program.
Thank you so much for having me again, Glenn. Really appreciate it.
Well, there seems to be a reorganization of the entire Middle East, a lot of deals being made. And again, only today we saw a Saudi, Turkey, Pakistani defense pact being signed. But first I wanted to ask about this deal possible deal now between Oman and Iran for some common control over the Strait of Hormuz. What is it? Because it seems like this actually is making progress, and something will come of this. So how can we understand this deal?
So the details that are out publicly, I think are quite corresponding with what I'm hearing privately as well. The issue, of course, is that for 4 or 5 days in a row, we've been hearing that it's very close. I heard it from the US side yesterday as well, a degree of optimism, but it still hasn't been finalized. And I'm not really sure exactly what is holding it up. But bottom line is that they've been going back and forth between a couple of different models. One model is that all of the traffic inbound comes through the Iranian side, the northern side of the strait, with Iran's permission and notification to Iran, and that everything that leaves would leave through a southern channel that goes through Omani waters. For some time, that seemed to have been the central proposal, but there was a different proposal as well, and they seem to be going back and forth, at least variations of this. And that is that actually there will be one channel, and that channel goes through both Iran and Oman's water. So it will come in on the Iranian side, it will go through Omani waters, come back onto Iranian waters, and the exit is going through that same essential channel or corridor that has been created. This is the Iranian preference. The Omanis, who for all practical purposes are not actually negotiating just for themselves, they're negotiating for the US and the GCC as well. And that's part of the reason why their position in these negotiations are frankly different from what they were when they were representing themselves. But their preference is one in which there is 2 corridors minimum, and it would go through, there would be different inbound and outbound traffic. Now, I think at the end of the day, the reason why the US is not formally at the table, nor any of the GCC countries, is because of the Iranians insisting that the negotiations about this fate of the strait will be done by those who have territorial waters in the strait. That is a way of reinforcing the Iranian interpretation of the strait, which is there are no international waters in the strait. It's territorial waters of Oman, and there's territorial waters of Iran, and there's nothing in the middle. And in some ways, at least indirectly, this is at least partially accepted by having the negotiations take place with only Iran and Oman, not even the other GCC are included. The Iranians reject countries such as Kuwait or others who are claiming that, because of a lot of traffic in usage of the strait, they have a say in this, by essentially saying that, countering by saying that China has even more traffic through the strait than, for instance, Bahrain does not give them a seat at the table. That, nevertheless, is more or less accepted. But de facto, the US and the other countries are part of the negotiations. There's not going to be a deal unless the US also agrees. Now, what the exact final outcome is, we still don't know, but it does appear to be that whatever variation comes through here, there is going to be a clarification of what Article 5 of the memorandum essentially spelled out. It left some ambiguity. Those ambiguities are essentially filled out with details in this agreement. And it seems to go back to what the Iranians wanted, which is to make sure that there's no ships coming in or out without notification to the Iranians, at least not in this interim period. When it comes to fees, etc., it's not clear yet whether that will be part of the interim or only something that will be towards the end. There is an aspect here that is important to understand. Even though the Omanis are negotiating on behalf of the others, and even though their own position probably is a bit closer to that of the Iranians, it's because of the fact that this kind of deal actually really strengthens Oman's position within the GCC as well. Because Oman does not have oil and gas like the other GCC states, is much poorer than the other ones, but because of its strategic location at the strait, will gain leverage, particularly vis-a-vis the Emirates, which oftentimes have created problems for Oman. So I think it's important to recognize that Omanis probably are quite happy going in some sort of direction that is more close to the Iranian position, because it actually gives them a lot of benefit as well. But they have to balance that by making sure that they have a continued good relations with the US, which is ultimately very important for Oman as well.
Well, that's a fascinating dynamic, though. It does make sense. I mean, if you're sitting in Iran, you don't want to negotiate with the US. That would undermine your entire argument that this is about Iranian waters. But it's interesting how the US position, how the US position is here, because I remember back in May, you said that the US has a degree of optimism that a deal will go through. But at the end of May, I remember Trump went out on social media and he wrote that as Oman and Iran was having talks, about these issues, he wrote that Oman should behave, otherwise, or else we'll have to blow them up. Blow them up was a direct Trump quote. Again, he's a bit loose with his language, so these things don't shock anymore. But obviously, it reflected the U.S. position that he didn't care much for these talks at all. Does this signify the U.S. position is shifting, or how?
No, Glenn. I think what that interpreted was that back then the Omanis were putting forward compromise proposals that the U.S. was very upset about. So, for instance, the proposal for joint management of the system, which I think is what we're going to end up with now, was an Omani proposal. And the US side was not happy about that. The proposal for environmental service fees instead of tolls was also an Omani proposal. And the US was not happy about that. What you saw there was the US because at the time, the US was trying to create a southern corridor in the strait that would be operational and fortified even if war returned. That would be a way of making sure that the Iranians couldn't close the Strait of Hormuz. And they were putting pressure on Oman because you could not have a southern corridor without Oman's buy-in or approval in one way, because it's Oman's waters. So the US was really strong-arming the Omanis to essentially abandon their previous position and take on a position that was closer to that of the US. This is what I was hinting at earlier on when I said that the Omanis are currently negotiating on behalf of everyone else in that grouping rather than themselves, because they themselves are the ones who have put forward a lot of these compromise proposals that the US earlier have rejected. And on top of that, what was perhaps not reported, at least to the best of my knowledge, was that also when Rubio went to the region immediately after the MOU, and it was presented as some sort of a trip in which he was going to help explain the MOU or bring the countries on board. No, it was actually there to force the Omanis to take the American position. And he threatened them with sanctions if they didn't. Now, after all of that and another 2 or 3 weeks of war, where are we ending up? We're ending up somewhere that is pretty close to where we were before, without any significant change in the direction of the US. In fact, if there is a change, it's a clarification in the direction of the interpretation of the Iranians.
Yeah, well, I can understand, why the US doesn't want to give up or allow Iran to have any administrative control or the ability to impose fees, however it is reasoned. But again, it's limits. Well, if it limits what you can change, you do have to accept these new realities.
Exactly.
But you wrote that it wouldn't be so bad on your Substack, which I referred to earlier. Had a great piece on how the Strait of Hormuz can be seen through the lens of the Suez Canal, that is, and the developments that took place there in 1956. Essentially that U.S. doesn't need to control it as long as it's open. I was wondering if you can explain this argument and its comparison, of course.
Yeah, because thank you for bringing that up, because I think it's really important, because there's been a conflation of what the actual U.S. interest here is. Is it to make sure that the strait is open, that trade is flowing in a non-discriminatory and predictable way, or is the actual interest control? Because oftentimes when you see even a restrainer definition of what U.S. interest would be in regions like this, including in the Red Sea, one interest that is accepted by almost all schools is that the waterways should be open. But it's very important to understand that them being open and them being under American control, or the American side depriving a hostile party from having management over it, are two different things. And those interests have now been completely conflated in this crisis. When you look at it historically, the U.S. interest has been to keep the flow open. If it can be controlled by the U.S. or a friendly power, that's all the more helpful. But even if it's under the administrative control of a hostile power or a non-friendly power, that has nevertheless not been preferred, but it can be something the U.S. lives with as long as there are guarantees that the flow will be free. So the second interest in the hierarchy of interests is to make sure to deprive control by someone else. It's there only in order to serve the primary interest, which is to make sure that the flow is free. If you can have an arrangement in which the Iranians are ensuring, together with the Omanis, their management is not stopping the flow. They don't have an interest in stopping the flow. They need to get their oil out and their imports in through the strait. But if they can guarantee that it is open in a non-discriminatory way, even if the control or management is not in the hands of the U.S., it is still acceptable. That has been the historical case. And 1956 is a very interesting example, because there you actually had two U.S. allies and a country that was becoming a strong ally, which was Israel, France, and the UK, going to war with Egypt when Egypt asserted sovereignty over the Suez Canal. And the U.S. sided with Egypt, even though Egypt at the time was in the communist camp, was closer to the Soviet Union, not formally aligned, but nevertheless aligned itself with the Soviets, because the Egyptians guaranteed that free flow. The sovereignty would not jeopardize that. And it was a huge blow to the French and to the Brits, who prior to that had been managing the Suez, even though, of course, it was not their territory. So I think if we can deconflate these interests, I think we can see that there's a pathway out of this, a pathway that still is not going to be celebrated in Washington in any way, shape, or form. But it's always important to remember, what is the primary interest? What is the secondary interest? And remind ourselves that the secondary interest is there to serve the primary interest. It is not on the same level as the primary interest.
No, I agree. No, those are different interests. Again, with the open waterways is the main interest, but it also, but controlling the straits also has a strategic advantage, though. I mean, throughout history, you also had, well, countries wanted to control maritime corridors for I guess for two reasons. One, security, for to keep their own ships being able to have the freedom of navigation, but also to limit the security of others. And if you read the work of Zbigniew Brzezinski, for example, it makes the point that it's very important to communicate to the Chinese. If they ever try to challenge us, we can shut down the Strait of Malacca. If the Russians ever try to challenge us, we can shut down, for example, the Baltic Sea. And so wouldn't this undermine the hegemonic position that the U.S. strives for if it would simply reach a deal where the straits are open but outside U.S. control?
In some ways, yes, but I think it's also very important to understand, what did this war do and what did it just reveal? The war did not give Iran control over the Strait. The war revealed that Iran all along had the ability to close the Strait. So accepting that reality is not to grant Iran something it didn't have before. It had it, just had not revealed it. So, to view it as some sort of a concession or saying, oh, this is granting the Iranians the control, whether the U.S. grants it or not, the Iranians have the ability to close the strait, and they did beforehand. We just know it much better now because it was exercised. Now, I'll be frank with you, I don't think the Iranians were as confident of that ability that they had either, but now it's clear to all. And then that raises the second question. How important is the Strait of Hormuz at the end of the day for US? And how important is the Middle East? We have seen a clear intellectual development in the last 20 years in which increasingly countries are saying that the Middle East is not that crucial. It is not that vital. It does not justify all of these wars. It does not justify 19 military bases in the region. So if we're actually genuine and honest about what is a vital region and what is not, we should not have huge problems. Now, of course, if this had happened in a different way, an orderly withdrawal from the United States, not under threat, not as a result of conflict, it would have been much more digestible for Washington. Now it's becoming more difficult because it's happening essentially as a result of losing a war, which creates its own dynamics. But at the core of it, is this something that the US really should go to war for? Well, if it is, why isn't it, right? At the end of the day, all we're seeing bombing campaigns. We're not seeing a mobilization of 500,000 troops to go in and take over all of southern Iran. And if the administration really believes that the interest warrants that type of a response, then they would put that forward and they would start that mobilization if they believe they have the capacity. I think what we're seeing is it just clear recognition of the fact that a combination of them not having the capacity and certainly an incapacity of selling such a war to the American public, because no one buys it. No one believes that this is necessary. Take a look at just the importance of the flow through the strait over the course of the last 20, 25 years. There was a moment in which about 40% of world oil was flowing through the Strait of Hormuz. Today it's about 21, 22%. Why is that? It's because Brazil is now pumping 5 million barrels of oil a day, quite a bit above what the Iranians are pumping. You have the shale oil explosion in the United States. You are seeing increased oil production in several other regions than before, and that is going to continue. So even without bypass lines, etc., in which oil would go through the Red Sea, etc., you're still going to see a continued diminishing of the strait. That's not to say that it's unimportant, but you add that process together with the fact that there likely will be investments in pipelines that would bypass the strait that won't be ready for another 10 years fully or so. But nevertheless, you're going to see the significance of the strait go down. And as a result, it just makes it more and more difficult for the United States to justify a major military action. Also, when you think about the alternative cost, what does that do to the US's ability to then address conflicts elsewhere that are far more vital and clear, such as in the South China Sea? We're already seeing now that the US is running out, depleting its air defense systems, Patriots, THAADs. And on top of that, it is also depleting its munitions and projectiles such as Tomahawks. Is the Persian Gulf that important to warrant that type of a war with 500,000 troops and even more munitions and bombings and interceptors being used when there are other regions from Taiwan and elsewhere that also are important, arguably far more important? I just don't think anyone in Washington can make that argument any longer.
Yeah, I think this is the weapons being depleted is can be something that really shifts the American position, because by going all in on this war against Iran, the weapons US are spending now, they actually do need them for, the US also has security concerns. It doesn't need this for its actual defense. I mean, this is I think a huge mistake. But if the security of the US itself is challenged by this war, I think that could be what is required for the US position to shift. Though I do want to pivot a bit to this the other deal I referenced earlier. That is this defense pact between Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Pakistan. That is again, it's about the attack on one should be considered attack on all. But what is the competing motivations here? I can understand the Saudis. They obviously are under direct attacks. You see Turkey, they have their own rivalry with Iran, but I don't see them wanting to go to war with the Iranians. And then you have Pakistan, which well, it's hard to see them go attacking Iran unless you got some corrupt generals. But what is the purpose here, though? Or they're just three very different actors with different incentives?
I think they all have different incentives and different concerns of their own. The Pakistanis don't have the money, but they have the military means. The Saudis don't have the military means, but they have the financing, and they have other ideological factors that are important. And I think the Turks are doing this increasingly, not just because of the balancing against Iran, but also because it does not trust NATO in case the Israelis were to attack Turkey down the road, which the Israelis increasingly are talking openly about. Turkey being the new big threat in the Middle East from the Israeli perspective. This is a narrative that started at a moment in which the Israelis thought that they had already defeated Iran. Of course, the situation is very, very different now. But it is something that I think is noteworthy, that as soon as the Israelis think that they have managed to get rid of one geopolitical opponent, immediately they start building this narrative about how this next country is the big, big threat to stability in the region, etc. And, we had Naftali Bennett, for instance, saying that Erdogan is the most dangerous person in the Middle East. The same thing that we saw happening between Israel and Iran back in 1991, when the Israelis decided that the geopolitical circumstances had shifted and that Iran no longer was a potential friend of Israel, but the main rival. Overnight, you just started to see these articles portraying Iran as the big threat, whereas just months earlier, they were still lobbying Washington to talk to Iran and make up with Iran because they needed Iran as part of the previous geopolitical situation that existed. So I think all of them are coming at it from different directions, but the overarching thing is, you cannot rely on the American security umbrella. So you need to have some alternatives, not just one alternative. This is not a replacement of reliance on the United States. I think this is complementing it, and it will probably not be the only thing. And I think you will see more of this in the region, perhaps not as impactful as this one potentially could be, but you will see more of this because everyone in the region understands the American security umbrella turned out to be much more hollow than they expected. Moreover, American decision-making is far from rational and predictable. And as a result, you would be quite foolish to put all of your security eggs in that basket. Europe should perhaps take some inspiration from the Middle East right now when it comes to this. Europe has had plenty of time to rethink things and have failed to do so, but that's perhaps a different conversation. The question then is this really, an anti-Iran pact? I think there's different motivations here. I think there's an element of it to at least try to balance against Iran because they're seeing that the other entity that they were hoping be that balancing element against Iran turned out not to be reliable or effective. So now they have to find their alternatives. The danger here is if we start seeing deeper bloc formations in the Middle East. That, I think, would be a huge problem. If, however, this is something in the interim, but the real investment will be some sort of a collective security. We talked about it before, indivisible security for the region. I think that's a much better path to go. I find this development potentially a threat to that, but it's not entirely clear yet. And part of it is also because is this really reliable? Will Pakistan go to war with Iran over Saudi Arabia? Will Turkey go to war with Iran over Saudi Arabia? At the end of the day, these agreements are only as strong as their credibility, and this one's credibility may be stronger than the American security umbrella at this point, but not necessarily fully credible. But if I was sitting in Iran, I would not dismiss this. I would recognize that unless there is an effort by the Iranians to also try to move in a direction that relieves some of the concerns of the neighbors and disincentivizes them from this type of a bloc formation, they may very well end up in a scenario in which, yes, the region is not relying on the US to balance Iran, but it is still investing heavily only in a formation that does balance Iran, rather than seeking some formulation that could actually bring everyone into a security arrangement, including Iran, of course.
Yeah, no, that seems reasonable. That something has to appear in the vacuum, though. If Iran expects the U.S. to pull out, what would replace it? Yeah, ideally, would have some collective security deal that includes Iran, but hopefully down the path. About the Europeans, though, since you mentioned them, this is they actually had their own path towards a pan-European security architecture, deals with the Russians, as we know, in 1990 and 94, and I think they went with NATO expansion instead because it was a good way of making sure that the US remained in Europe. But again, now that they see the US, the less trust in the US security guarantees, the goal in Europe now is apparently to make a new NATO only with the Europeans. So not go back to the plan of a inclusive security architecture based on the Helsinki Accords, but instead reinventing NATO, but without the Americans. So it's we're truly led by madmen here, I think. But another deal, though, which is I guess could reshape the Middle East, is this US-Saudi deal. I find this peculiar because this nuclear deal would make a nuclear deal with Iran, near impossible, it would seem, if the US would be that blatant about different standards for Saudi Arabia and Iran. Indeed, I heard a journalist ask about this, and the response from the White House was, well, Saudi Arabia is an ally, and they get special rules because it's America first. But this is not, if this is the basis of regional security architecture, then it's going to be very unstable. So what do you make of this deal? Or
I see several dangerous things with this deal, particularly in the context of the US simultaneously trying to get a deal with the Iranians. On the one hand, this is less than what the Saudis wanted, but also it's completely cutting out the Israelis. The Saudis also wanted a security guarantee from the US. I'm not so sure that they've completely given up on that. I think in their new approach of having several layers, they would still want it, even if it's not as reliable as it could have been, whereas they thought it would have been. It's still something that I think they potentially want. And one of the dangers of doing this nuclear deal first is that it may put the Saudis in a position in which they will be able to strong-arm the US to later on give a defense pact, a security guarantee as well. And part of the reason I would think that would be bad for the US and for the region is because the US should disentangle itself from these regional conflicts. Giving a NATO Article 5 type of a security guarantee to Saudi Arabia would be the exact opposite of that. But we have the examples of other countries that once they have the nuclear enrichment capability and they have a pathway to a nuclear bomb, they have used that as a way of pressuring the US into giving a security guarantee. Essentially saying, well, if you don't give us a security guarantee, we have no option but to go for a nuclear weapon. So the US is now giving the Saudis the same technology it for the last 40, 50, 60 years have tried to deprive Iran from having, and has gone to war to deprive the Iranians from having, but it's granting it to the Saudis. That then creates a significant problem potentially for these negotiations with Iran. The Iranians had, in earlier discussions, agreed to a moratorium on enrichment that could be as long as 10 or 12 years. It's difficult for me to see that the Iranians would stick to that if simultaneously the US is granting that same technology to the Iranians, to the Saudis. And on top of that, with far less inspections, in fact, no international inspections compared to what the Iranians are agreeing to. And that creates a different problem in and of itself. How are you going to get JCPOA or JCPOA plus inspections of the Iranian program as part of a nuclear deal that Trump says that he wants, if you're simultaneously exempting the Saudis from any such inspection? It's insanity in my view. And it doesn't seem like the administration really calculated how this would be impacting the Iran negotiations. That deal, incidentally, has been ready for some time with the Saudis. It was announced now for other reasons that has to do with reporting requirements and things of that, making sure that it's all done before Trump leaves office. But I think the two of them together is actually, they're working against each other. Doesn't mean that the US cannot strike other deals with the Saudis, etc. But to do it exactly in this manner, if these are the details that stand at the end of it, that once we fully know the details, I think it's going to create a significant problem for any deal with the Iranians.
Well, yeah, because the Iranians want to move away from the U.S. hegemonic system, and if you accept that the U.S. gets to write special rules for whoever are obedient and a different set of rules for those who do not obey, you accommodate it, I guess. But yeah, that kind of takes me to another issue I wanted to ask. That is what might the Iranian parliament push though as an alternative arrangement for the region? Because I saw in the Iranian media yesterday that the Iranian parliament might present a bill which would then, well, consider a bit of a hardline bill that would limit Israeli ships going through the Strait of Hormuz, or any ships going to Israel or benefiting Israel. Also, they would demand reparations. Again, it was, yeah, well, I would define it as a hardline proposal. And if you see this combined with, for example, the strikes they did on Jordan, which seemed to, well, be aligned with the wider objective of encouraging them to break their ties with the US. So do you think the Iranians would be tempted to go for an all-out victory that is just, well, humiliate the US, kick them out of the region, and essentially assert a complete dominance over the Strait of Hormuz? Well, to various degrees, because again, there must be a lot of anger there, and even from the public, and you can't really ignore this either. And you can. I also make the point, you can imagine if it was the other way around, if Iran had done this to American cities, would the U.S. not have some vengeance in mind? I mean, how do you see this? Again, it could just be a political signaling that this is the alternative to a proper, good faith diplomacy. If we don't get that, we'll hand it over to these hardliners who will just go all out in humiliating the U.S. So I'm not sure how to interpret this, to be honest.
Yeah, no, so I think there's elements of all of that taking place right now. There is an element in which I think there is a sense of utility to be able to signal what the alternative is. But I think also there's a reality in which the hardliners in the parliament, and it's important to note, throughout, up until, what is it, a week or so ago, the Iranian parliament was not in session because of the war. And as a result, that was a factor that was not present in the negotiations. Now, when they are present in the negotiations, we do have examples in which the parliament has passed bills that have been meant to strengthen the Iranian position, but ultimately has actually ensured that there is no deal. Similarly to when the Congress is, imposing new sanctions, and it's nominally to strengthen the American position, but in effect, and also in many cases, in intent, was designed to undermine the negotiations. And I think the Iranians should be very careful about this, because yes, there's a motivation for vengeance. There's a particular motivation for humiliation of Trump because of what Trump has done. But the counter effect of that is not necessarily that the US does something. The counter effect could be precisely what we have begun to see the inklings of, which is that other players in the region ultimately draw the conclusion that Iran is going to go too far in their view of how it will try to assert its control and position in the region, and that then necessitates that they form bloc formations to counter Iran's rising position. And that will then only change who the Iranians are in a rivalry against, rather than allowing the Iranians to exit this very hot rivalry that has been going on for quite some time, that is constantly on the verge of war. And in the long-term perspective of establishing security, I think it's quite clear that type of a situation in which there is this natural reaction, not just this deal with the Saudis and the Pakistanis, but something much, much more than that, a full bloc formation to counter Iran and to balance against Iran, is ultimately not in Iran's interest. So I think the Iranians is going to have to balance whatever desire and need they feel for humiliating Trump or pushing the US out, however they want to phrase it, with what that actually does for Iran's interest if it generates a counterforce that did not exist before, that was not driven by the security needs of those countries in the region before, but rather driven by American hegemonic incentives or imperatives, that ultimately would be a very bad position for the Iranians to find themselves in.
Yeah, no, that would be a mistake, I guess, if you replace the U.S. hegemonic alliance system with a new bloc system for the sole purpose of containing Iran. And I guess with the collapse of the U.S. soft power over the Iran war, I think it's quite remarkable how the Iranians built their soft power. I mean, the kind of empathy you have now towards Iran, and I guess, I have never seen this in my lifetime, at least. So it would be, I guess, a mistake for the Iranians to throw this away by going overboard on the vengeance. I did want to ask, the last thing though, how the Middle East could the war now could extend itself. It looked for a while like Zelensky had an objective in terms of merging these wars, the Ukraine war with the Iranian war. Although it seems to have dialed back a bit since. Do you still see this? Do you see this possibility? Because it seems like a recipe for World War III, to be honest.
Yeah, it would be a disastrous outcome if the US were to buy into what I wrote. I think it was on my Substack about this as well. I did not see a likelihood that Zelensky's visit would generate a positive response from the US side. I think the Trump administration would have enough of their guards up to be suspicious of this. And it does seem like Zelensky went back relatively empty-handed on this specific aspect. But my worry was always that the Trump administration would end up making small decisions, none of them in and of themselves being seen as an acceptance of this, but nevertheless, in their totality, would move in that direction. And then the merging of the wars would happen over time, rather by a big decision, but rather by 1,000 paper cuts. That, I think, was a higher likelihood. And that's part of the reason why, despite the fact that Zelensky did not seem to be successful in this one visit, does not reduce my concern that this may end up being a direction that we go in. I don't think Zelensky is going to stop pushing that narrative that is the underlying basis for all of this, which is that at the end of the day, there's the same enemies in both of these theaters, and as a result, it is the same war. This is something he's been saying for some time now. He repeated it even after leaving Washington. So I think that frame is going to remain in place, and as a result, we may be moving towards that, even if it's imperceptible day by day, that the trend nevertheless will be in that direction. And I agree with you fully. It would be an absolute disaster, and it certainly would not serve U.S. interest.
What would be the objective here, though? Because it could, backfire as well. It could pull the Europeans into the Ukraine war and, spread their resources even more thin. What do you think the calculations are of Zelensky, given this pushing this so hard?
And it's important to also understand, from what I've heard, there are senior people in the Ukrainian security establishment in the military that are completely opposed to this. And they're opposed to it because of a different assessment of the risk. The risk is, in their view, that Ukraine would end up getting overstretched and engaged in the Iran war without generating an American participation in the war with Russia. And as a result, the return on investment would be a negative one. Whereas I think the way Zelensky is looking at it, the risk is worth it because he thinks that whatever overextension Ukraine may experience, it will be compensated by the fact that the US will be much more directly involved against the Russians. It is an insane bet. There's some people who tell me that he's doing this more because of it as a distraction from the domestic problems he's faced with, etc. But I think it's difficult to completely buy that, mindful of the fact that it has been the Ukrainian position from the very beginning of this war to get the US much, much more directly involved in the war. And if you're sitting in Ukraine, there's an understandable reason as to why you would push for that. It's not illogical for them to push for it. I think it would be illogical for the US to accept it, though.
Yeah, well, let me, just one last question. Where does Israel fit into this? There's a lot of deals happening now. Again, the deal between Oman and Iran, the Saudi, Turkey, Pakistani deal, the US Saudi deal. I mean, there's a lot of things which could reshape the region here. Where does Israel stand? Because I feel they're being awfully quiet at the moment, which is, I'm not sure if that's good or bad.
Yeah, well, keep in mind that they're also entering the political season right now. So a lot of focus is turning inwards into what will become a very decisive election for Netanyahu, of course. On the Ukraine thing, I think the biggest winners, frankly, would be the Israelis. It would give another lease on life on the Iran war, which the Israelis want. It would give an opportunity for the Europeans to enter the Iran war in a manner that they have not, at least not directly. And perhaps most importantly, it would reframe the entire Iran war, because right now it's very centered on Israel's role in it, and which is well-deserved, mindful of the fact that Israel has had a central role in it. But going forward, it could end up becoming one in which defeating Iran is not there to defend Israel, it's there to defend Ukraine. And that will have a completely different political gestability in Europe in particular, but also in the United States. Israel's standing has plummeted in the United States. It is a huge drag for the administration that this Iran war is seen by so many in his own base as having been done for Israel. Now, they won't make it more happy if it's done for Ukraine, but it will split some of the Democrats who otherwise have been opposed to this war. It will be more difficult for them to take that position because they remain still very committed to support for Ukraine in its war against Russia. So I think the Israelis see a lot of opportunities with this in a manner that I don't think anyone else can see the same level of positives. When it comes to these other things, I think the Israelis will probably be very worried about this new formulation, particularly if it ends up being one that does not focus solely on countering Iran, but actually is ends up in some ways even including Iran. There's been efforts by the Pakistanis in particular to get Iran into that formulation with Turkey and Saudi Arabia. If that ends up happening, I think the Israelis will see this increasingly being a constellation that is there to counter Israel. There's question marks as to whether this deal does eliminate a chance of normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Some in Israel, of course, are still very much hoping for such a normalization. Doesn't appear to me that Netanyahu cares that much about it. But it's not clear to me that he actually would be a block to that type of a normalization with Israel. I just don't see that being, in the cards right now and for the foreseeable future, or even particularly desired by the Saudis at this moment, in which we still have an ongoing genocide and the anger against Israel, even amongst Saudis and in the region as a whole, is still at a level that is much higher than it's been in the last 10, 15 years.
Well, hopefully something good can come out of all of these deals. At least I'm a little bit optimistic now about the deal between Oman and Iran, especially if it has the blessing of its neighbors in the US. It could be, if it can resolve the Hormuz issue, I think the other things would be easier to fix. So anyways, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it, Glenn.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Let's talk about Iran. If this isn't a sign that the U.S. is losing the war with Iran, I don't know what is. CNN is reporting that military members have been asked for creative ways to punish Iran. According to the reports, an email went out that says, we're looking for new creative and unconventional ways to pressure and punish Iran. You don't go doing that if what you're doing is working, and clearly it's not working. And also Reuters has reported that the U.S. is almost out of highly accurate long-range missiles.
By the way, Hegseth, we should point out, came out and said, that's a lie. You're lying.
Okay, we'll talk about that in a second. But, you know, there's always sanctions, right? That's one of our favorites. We've been doing that for decades, though, in an impressively cruel way. And yet it's been ineffective at forcing Iran to our will. In a statement to CNN, a CENTCOM person said, U.S. Central Command has a long history of thinking and working in innovative ways. Well, that certainly is true. It's another way of saying we played dirty. Cloud seeding in Vietnam, another one that comes to mind. Here's something creative. Did you know that the CIA once tried to kill Patrice Lumumba, the former prime minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo, by putting cobra venom in his toothpaste? So is that what we're going for here? What do you think of when they're asking for creativity?
You know, when I first saw that, I thought, this is fake news. There's no way they would do this. And from a friend of mine, I got a source who has access to people who were involved in the war down there, and they said, no, it's legit that they actually did pass this off. And it's curious that you mentioned, Natalie, that Hegseth says, oh, it's 100% fake news and all this kind of stuff. And yet then apparently the Pentagon also said, oh, there's nothing unusual about us asking for unconventional ways. I mean, kind of which is it? I mean, get your stories straight. But I think that it does underscore the absence of a strategy here, and the unwillingness to acknowledge everything that we have tried didn't work. I mean, just look at the phases that we've gone through. 40 days and 40 nights of bombing, this massive amount, 15,000 strikes, I think I've seen was what the total was at that time. Didn't make them budge, because you can't go after these granite mountains where their missile factories, not just the launchers, are under the ground where they can launch. They don't even have to bring them up out in the open in some of these cases. You can't knock them out. They're impervious even to nuclear weapons. That was known ahead of time, so it should have precluded even going into trying to win this from the air, because we can't penetrate those. But whatever, we ignored that. So we tried it. It didn't work, of course. Then we tried a couple of months. Let's starve them out. Let's have a blockade. That didn't work either. And then it's like, all right, let's have another mini one now, 13-day consecutive fight. That didn't work. Then let's try this MOU. That would have worked, except that then we gummed that up by not making Israel agree to point number 1 in the 14-point memorandum. And then we violated point number 5 of the memorandum and did not do the other points, like we're going to release their frozen funds, we're going to get rid of all the sanctions, all this kind of stuff. So we undermined our chance there. And so now that you're looking for another way forward, President Trump was out the last couple of days saying, we're really close to a deal. We have something really close. They're begging us for a deal. And if they behave and if they do what we're asking for and give us a good deal, then we'll what deal are you talking about? You had one in your hand. It was in the bag. It was signed. And now you want a magical another way? I mean, what would that even look like? There is no other way. So that's all just myth, and it's just us floundering like a fish on the shore trying to flop around to get back in the water.
But if I may, what sounds scary to me is that we've already shown that we do not abide by international war crime standards. And so creativity could, in fact, mean more of that. We started by bombing young girls in a school, so anything goes, right? And so they're not saying within the confines of morality. It's like, hey, let's go the snake venom route. That's how I'm reading it. And so maybe you could react to that.
I again wasn't reading it that way. I'm still, part of my mind is still in what used to be the America that I used to know, and the one that you wouldn't even have to ask that question, because obviously our intent is to follow the rule of law, is to go by the international the war crimes, priorities, et cetera. We would even punish our own people when they violated the war crimes, et cetera. We did that. Now then, you're right, that everything is open. So I have to open my lens here to consider that statement in other terms, because the president is doing it. The Secretary of Defense literally prayed and bragged about having no mercy to the enemy and no quarter given. The exact quote from the Secretary of War, which is, of course, a war crime. And if he's saying that out loud, then imagine what he's saying not out loud behind the scenes. And so when people here, find creative ways, heretofore, everybody I ever served with, the only ways they would have even contemplated are things within the rule of law, or things that within the normal moral parameters that our country used to stand for. But now then, the parameters have been broadened out by Secretary Hegseth himself and the president's actions, that there's nothing that's off limits. So why would we not expect that some of these people may come up with something that is beyond or what used to be beyond the pale, now maybe is in the middle of the option menu?
So what do you make of this deal? Then Oman, Iran, and all of these ideas are sort of on the table, and that we could be maybe, according to 3 hours ago reports, that we're on the verge of being finalized. What does that mean, finalized? And
I think that what that means is that it's on the verge of being finalized for control of the Strait of Hormuz with Oman, between Oman and Iran. And so they have never said anything besides that the strait will be open under our administration. The Iranian side did. So what was agreed to in the memorandum of understanding, the Iran side is still trying to operate under. And said, even to this day, they say, if you abide by our rules, even though President Trump said the MOU is dead and the ceasefire is over, they said, we're going to continue to operate it. And if you follow our rules, you can still go out. And it has been that way. Now I think they're trying to get it formalized with Oman. And this could be a backdoor way for President Trump to try to claim some victory. I hope so, because if they get it open, and then traffic is going to flow back through, and interestingly force the same 60-day period. So apparently that clock would be reset, and for no fees to be charged in the 60-day period. That is literally verbatim the memorandum of understanding back on June 17th. Had we not gummed this up, Clayton, just imagine the strait would be probably somewhere between 75 and 80% open right now, because it's going to take a while to unwind it, because everybody has to, first of all, they got to be convinced that it's true, that it really is going to be open, and people aren't going to get hit when they don't go through according to what the Iranian side says. And once everybody does that, and we're not going to attack anybody either, then this traffic will start flowing. If we had just abided by the MOU, then we would get close to, operational capacity right now, and we wouldn't be worried about whether we're going to go back to war or not. So if we can start that clock again, just imagine that. I'm sorry. That was June 17th. Yeah. So June, July, August, we would be closing in on the end of that 60-day period. Now we're going to restart the clock, and now we're going to start it, presuming that we don't gum this one up. And it's going to push that further back to when all of the petroleum starts to go through the other products, like the helium, like the aluminum, the fertilizers, all that kind of stuff. All that stuff has had 2 more months to get backlogged. So I hope it works out this way, because it should. And I hope President Trump doesn't gum this up like he did the last time.
This episode is brought to you by Rumble Wallet. Quick question: how much control do you have over your money right now? Well, technology keeps reshaping our lives, and crypto is changing how financial transactions are made. Rumble Wallet makes it easy to set up a wallet and buy cryptocurrency. You can choose Bitcoin, a stable coin tied to the US dollar, or Tether Gold, which is in fact backed by real gold. It's non-custodial. That means you, not a bank or a platform, control the asset and access to your funds. And if you use MoonPay, you can fund your wallet using a debit card, credit card, or bank account. You can even tip your favorite Rumble creators like us here at Redacted or our cohorts. And for a limited time, when you go to wallet.rumble.com/redacted, you can claim $10 in US stablecoin with the promo code redacted10. So either scan that QR code that's on your screen right now, or visit wallet.rumble.com/redacted. Again, that promo code is redacted10, and you'll get $10 in US stablecoin. Terms apply. Visit rumble.com/promo-official-rules for details.
Finally, Bloomberg report out today, Colonel, says the U.S. shipped a record amount of distillate fuel overseas last week as our domestic stockpiles have fallen. Basically, all of our U.S. diesel exports, we've been sending a record amount overseas, and we've like wiped our whole barrels clean over here. What the hell are we thinking? What do you see happening right now with the fuel shortages?
And, we always talk about it, and ever since he was in office the first time, President Trump being a transactional individual, and that's how he thinks. That is on graphic display right here. He's just transactional. He's like, okay, I need the price of oil to not go too high. I need it to stay in this range right here. I need the price of gasoline, diesel, not to go too high. So I'm going to keep putting this stuff out there and taking it out of our SPR, whatever I got to do to keep it low today. And of course, he's been masterful at manipulating the price to make sure that the paper price of oil anyway stays in the range that he wants it to. That's deception because the fundamentals aren't there to support these low prices that we have right now. But that's because we've been getting rid of all of our strategic petroleum reserves. Well, those are getting close to the bottom now. And when you send all this stuff out there with diesel and jet fuel and other things that are needed by a lot of our partners around the world, which are losing it because of the Strait of Hormuz, which we started the war that caused all that problem, those have an expiration date too, because you get too low and now you can't do it. And once that happens, then the price will start going back up because we're just not going to have it. And of course, this short-sightedness has worked for this period of time for President Trump to keep the lid politically on it. But what it hasn't done is change the fundamentals. Meanwhile, you look at what the Chinese have done. I'm sorry?
We didn't say anything.
Oh, did we lose you?
No, I'm still here. I just hear somebody talking in the background. I didn't know if that was you.
Sorry, maybe our team was talking to our next guest. Sorry, apologize for that.
Sorry about that. But look at what the Chinese have done. They had foreseen problems like this and had a 1.5 billion barrel reserve. And so then they were able to dip into that because they bought it at low prices. And so when the price skyrocketed, they started using that, which helped all of us because it reduced by 4 million barrels a day their purchases. So that helped the supply problem here. And meanwhile, they've only gotten down to like 1.2 billion barrels. So they could go for months and months and months like this and not even think twice about it. But we can't. And now then ours, which was much smaller to begin with, I think it's now under 300,000 barrels. We're going to be in a real world of hurt if this thing doesn't get solved pretty quick, which is why I hope President Trump will not get in the way and let Oman and Iran open the strait.
Now, before I let you go, I want to get your reaction to this image. I saw what you had to say on X, but I'd like you to say it to us because you are saying that President Trump is seeing himself on par with some of America's best generals, even though he's never worn the uniform. It's decidedly lame, but who is it for? It's not for the, like, do we really think that, like, extrapolate what he's trying to say? I don't understand.
Yeah. As a combat veteran myself and as someone who values everybody else who was a combat veteran, this is just really, really problematic that you're putting yourself on a par with two of the greatest combat generals we've ever had in our history. I mean, literally, you're putting yourself in the middle of them, actually. And it's similar to that one that he posted a week or so ago of helping George Washington up through time because he's going to give George Washington a fan because he's, all this grandiose kind of stuff that is so aggrandizing and seeing himself as a godlike figure. It's just distasteful as well. But you said who's it for? There is a small coterie of just Trump lovers who eat that stuff up. I mean, they will be passing it around. They'll be reposting it. He reposts some of the reposts on his own account there because he loves the adulation, etc. But primarily, it's for him. That's how he likes to see himself as a heroic figure. The one, whatever, a couple of months back where he was making himself look like Jesus healing somebody. And when he got called out on that one, he said, "Oh, no, I was a doctor." Doctors don't wear that. They don't have light coming out of their hands, but that's a separate issue. But that tells you see a consistent pattern that he has this godlike image of himself. And that is really dangerous. Besides being distasteful, it's also dangerous because if he believes that he's all that, then that can lead him to take actions like the starting of this war, where the generals, the military, the intelligence experts, they all told him none of this would work. But he thinks, no, if I do it, it will work. And that's why we're not going to be out of the danger here, even though going back into a war here and doing this World War II style, big attack that he claimed he was going to do because he loves this grandiose stuff. And he may think that, no, for me, if I do it, it's going to work. And then it would be catastrophic for us. So I think that's a much bigger problem than just distasteful.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, great point.
And terrifying.
Colonel Dan Davis, always great to see you. Thank you so much. And it's, it's so
Always
funny.
my pleasure.
You think about like Trump, Colonel, like,
has gone mute as Iran struck another tanker in the Strait of Hormuz moments ago. Late on Friday into the early hours of Saturday, we are seeing another vessel is on fire on the Oman side of the Strait of Hormuz. This vessel likely hit by Iran as it tried to cross under U.S. escort. And we're seeing some satellite footage now confirming a strike has just taken place of a tanker. This, as Donald Trump has been repeatedly posting today on his social media platform, Donald Trump won the Iran war. And he has reposted this over and over again, an article by someone named James J. Carafano saying Donald Trump won the Iran war. And then Pete Hegseth has been reposting it as well. So here's what we're learning about this direct strike of a tanker on the Oman side of the Strait of Hormuz. Iran just struck another vessel in the U.S.-backed southern corridor of the Strait of Hormuz, with the vessel now on fire, likely an oil tanker attempting to cross under U.S. escort, given an ADNOC, an ADNOC oil spill response vessel. That's the Abu Dhabi Oil Company. Oil spill response vessel now operating in the area, per NASA firm's satellite imagery, where you can literally see kind of the heat, the flames emanating from this tanker. Around 25 to 40 U.S. fighter jets and several E-3G and E-2D AWAC aircrafts were actively escorting this vessel during transit, yet it was still not enough for successful passage. What we also learned this evening was the following. So ADNOC, that's the Abu Dhabi Oil Company. It's the Abu Dhabi state-run oil company. They just posted a few hours back that 15 of its vessels have been attacked by Iranian missiles or drones since the start of the war, including, get this, 3 this week. And that had not been published on the UK MTO. Remember how they used to publish a lot of real-time data? All of these Iranian strikes, which have been ruthless. Iran has been striking tanker after tanker. We've been reporting it. We can see a lot of it on this NASA firm satellite imagery. We can take a look at some of the Chinese satellite imagery and some of the other open source satellite imagery. It's why I've been reporting like a broken record, it almost seems like, every day, this tanker, that tanker, this tanker, and it's been totally covered up. The U.S. is out of interceptors. The U.S. is out of ATACMS on the HIMARS. The U.S. doesn't have Navy destroyer anti-ballistics, and Iran is just going ballistic, figuratively and literally. They're going ballistic, and they are being able to shoot with impunity any of these tankers, and the U.S. can do nothing right now. I mean, this is what CENTCOM in the United States has become. Wow, wow, wow. I mean, you take a look right here. Reuters finally reporting, ADNOC says attack on vessel staff significantly impacting operations, but they didn't go into what was said on the ADNOC website. This is the ADNOC website. Again, ADNOC is the Abu Dhabi state-owned oil company, Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. This is what it says over here. Since the beginning of the conflict, 15 of our vessels have been attacked by missiles and drones while transiting the Strait of Hormuz, including 3 vessels this week alone. Tragically, these attacks have resulted in 1 fatality and 20 injuries to crew members. Well, all of this is just being covered up by corporate news here in the United States. I mean, other than a passing reference on Reuters, any news networks want to cover, like, I don't know. Never mind. We don't need them. We have the Midas Touch network that does this right now. We're getting new news as we're recording this as well. There appear to be major clashes going on in Hayes in Yemen, in Western Yemen, where some of these Saudi-backed government forces, they control a smaller area in Yemen, in northern Yemen, They're striking the Houthis stronghold in Sana'a, and most of Western Yemen is the Houthis control. Remember yesterday, Saudi Arabia, in the past 24 hours, Saudi Arabia entered into the defense alliance with Turkey, enlarging the Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, now Turkey kind of triad, if you will, a defense pact, because the U.S. security umbrella is over. And we learned that Saudi Arabia went through most 2,800 PAC-3 interceptors. 86% of Saudi Arabia's Patriot interceptors are gone. I mean, talk about incompetence right there as well. Oh, do we have footage, everybody, from some of these clashes in Hazim? We're getting some footage, and it's a little dark, but let's take a look at some of these scenes of clashes in Yemen right now, where there's all-out war taking place. I don't know, maybe someone else want to. No, it's fine. We'll be the only ones who cover it. It's fine. Let's play it. And then remember, Donald Trump, he held that weird press conference that he stormed out of earlier. It was a press conference on American mining. He had all the mining CEOs. Remember that? And so when Trump left this press conference, he said, I've got to go. I got to go prosecute the war. That's my excuse for getting out of here. Remember, he said that? Here, play this clip.
I didn't know I was going to have so many people. I'll be here all day. If you could go quickly, I would appreciate it, because we have a war to prosecute, okay? That's my excuse for getting out of here a little bit early. But I've done my thing only in the sense that we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars and even billions of dollars.
And then earlier in the day, he gave that bizarre interview with Punchbowl News, where this is what Trump said about Iran. Let's play it.
Guys like that get in, they'll destroy this country.
You said yesterday, you just talked about Nevada. You said yesterday gas prices, correct me if I'm wrong, they might go up again a little bit. You said.
No, that's only if I have to do another hit.
Okay, so I mean.
They'll only go down, or if we make a deal, they want to make a deal. They want to make a deal. Look, it's obvious. They don't want to be hit. Okay, they want to make a deal. So we'll see.
How utterly pathetic. Meanwhile, we know that what Trump is focusing on is taking our taxpayer dollars to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars to build a Trump class of battleships. He wants to build a new class of battleships because he liked the way battleships looked like between the period of World War I and World War II. So he wants a nuclear-powered battleship versus, I don't know, unmanned submersives, drones, drone interceptors. I mean, man, maybe how about this? I've got a radical idea. Call me a radical over here. How about we reduce our military spending by close to $1 trillion? We'll still lead the world in military spending, and with the $1 trillion we save, we could tax the rich a little more too. And then we could have universal health care, single payer. We could have affordable housing. We could have affordability. What a crazy novel concept you got there, Ben. What a crazy novel concept. But Donald Trump yesterday bragging about, or in this past 48 hours, how he may just want to, just screw with us all. He may want to make the gas prices go up, up, up. He said, maybe I go to war again. Maybe I don't. It's like, what was that stupid game where you would guess which briefcase, you'd guess the thing into being the briefcase. Are we going to go in number one, or are we going to go with Howie Mandel? What was the show? Number one or number two? Don't play with us, man. What are you talking about? Maybe I'll make your gas prices go up. What a sicko he is. This is what he said the other day. Play this clip.
When oil goes down, and it's going to go down very rapidly, and it's happening very soon, already happening. If you look, today it's $75 down to 75. It's dropping. And we may have to send it up again. We may have to, what happened.
And now, obviously, with Iran firmly controlling the Strait of Hormuz, with the only question being when will Iran and Oman formally consummate the deal that they have, because the U.S. is out. The U.S. has nothing to do with the Iran-Oman deal. Like, it is just Iran and Oman. Although the U.S. is saying, if you make a deal with Oman, maybe we'll lift the sanctions. And Iran's like, we don't care. You're not in this. Lift the sanctions. Don't lift the sanctions. We control the Strait of Hormuz. But now the new thing from the Trump regime, right? Did you hear it earlier this morning? Treasury Secretary Bessent, he's like, the Strait of Hormuz, it's just a waterway. It's just a body of water. We're not even going to need this body of water in a few years because we've got some great plans. And our plans are going to mean no Strait of Hormuz is needed. You see where these con artists go, right? The war is going to end in a few days. The war is going to end in a few weeks. Hey, we're doing better than Vietnam. That's where they go. Oh, you know what? We don't even need the Strait of Hormuz. It's just some H2O. It's just some freaking molecules. We don't need these little these hydrogen and oxygen freaking molecules bonding. It's just, we don't even need Earth. We don't even need Earth anymore. We don't even need we're Neptune. We're freaking Neptune. That's where we are. I mean, who are these freaking frauds? Who are they? And just the way Bessent says it, dude, shut up, Bessent. Just shut up. Go back to your pink Malibu, Charleston, South Carolina mansion replica that you had and get the hell out of here. Here, play this clip.
There's some who've speculated the strait will never go back to being the way it was before. What would you say?
I think they're saying that in a doomsday sort of way. I would say it in another way. The strait is never going back to the way it was because the Iranians have used or tried to use it as a choke point. What we are going to see over the next 2 years, the strait's going to become irrelevant. It is going to become just another body of water. And I would say that more than 50 or 70% of the energy that moves through the strait now is going to go through underground pipelines.
Well, there you have it, folks. Let me know what you think. Did you get WTF America? Have you pre-ordered the book I wrote with my brothers? My publisher's on my back. He's like, Ben, you got to tell people, do the pre-orders. Pre-order's the most important thing. If you can pre-order WTF America.
Kofi, follow me.